The ground shook under running feet, and Alira did not look back. Somewhere behind her, drums were pounding across the ceremony grounds, calling every unmarried wolf in the kingdom to gather before sunset. She could hear the roar of thousands of voices rising into the evening sky, but none of that mattered right now. A weak cry had reached her ears from the narrow path behind the old bakery, and she had turned toward it without thinking twice. An old woman lay crumpled against a fallen log, her thin body trembling, her breath coming in short gasps. Her silver hair had come loose from its braid and stuck to her damp forehead. Alira dropped to her knees beside her at once, ignoring the mud soaking into her only good dress, the dress she had spent 3 months of saved coins to buy for a ceremony she would now miss. "Can you hear me?" Alira asked gently, cradling the woman's head with one arm. "I am here. You are not alone." The old woman's eyes fluttered open, cloudy and pale, yet strangely sharp at the same time, as though she were studying Alira's face with great care. "Child," she whispered, "you should be at the gathering. Everyone is at the gathering." "You matter more than a ceremony," Alira said simply, and she meant it. She had grown up without parents, raised by the kitchen staff of Blackthorn Ridge, and she knew what it felt like to be forgotten. She would not add to anyone's loneliness if she could help it. She helped the woman sit up, checked that no bones were broken, and offered her own water pouch. The woman drank slowly, her hand shaking around the small clay bottle. When she finished, she looked at Alira for a long moment, and something like recognition passed behind her eyes, though Alira could not have known what it meant. "What is your name, child?" the woman asked. "Alira." The old woman's fingers tightened slightly around the empty water pouch. "Alira," she repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "A fine name. Do you know where it comes from?" "No," Alira admitted. "I never knew my parents. The name was given to me by the woman who found me as a baby, left at the gates of the eastern village." The old woman said nothing for a moment, only studied Alira's face again, tracing the shape of her eyes, her jaw, the small mark near her collarbone that Alira had always assumed was simply a birthmark. Then the woman smiled, a tired, knowing smile that did not quite reach the sadness in her gaze. "You have a kind heart," the woman said. "Kindness like yours is rare in this world, especially on a night when every wolf in the kingdom is racing toward the ceremony grounds, hoping the moon will choose them a mate. You gave that up to sit with an old woman in the mud." "I could not leave you here," Alira said. "Besides, I never expected the ceremony to choose anyone for me. I am a servant, nobody important." Something flickered across the old woman's face, quick as a shadow crossing the moon. "Do not say that," she said, her voice suddenly firm. "Never say that about yourself again." Before Alira could ask what she meant, the sound of distant horns cut through the trees. The ceremony was beginning. She could feel the change in the air, a low hum of magic rolling across the land, the kind of ancient power that only surfaced once a year, when the moon reached its fullest point, and the bonding spell was cast over every unmarried wolf gathered at the grounds. The old woman gripped Alira's wrist with surprising strength. "Listen to me carefully. My name is Petra. I have lived a long life, and I have seen more than most would believe possible. I need you to take something from me, and you must promise to keep it safe." She reached into the folds of her worn cloak and pulled out a small pendant on a silver chain. It was old, the metal dulled by time, shaped like a crescent moon wrapped around a single tear-shaped stone. The stone seemed to catch the fading light strangely, almost glowing from within. "I cannot take this," Alira said, shaking her head. "It looks precious. It should stay with you." "It has already done its work for me," Petra said. "Now it needs to protect someone else. Please, child, humor an old woman." Reluctantly, Alira let Petra fasten the chain around her neck. The moment the pendant touched her skin, a strange warmth spread through her chest, gentle as sunlight, and then faded just as quickly. She told herself it was nothing, only the excitement of the evening playing tricks on her senses. "Thank you," Petra said, patting her hand. "Now, help this old woman to her feet, would you? I believe I can walk the rest of the way on my own." Alira helped her stand, and Petra leaned briefly on a wooden cane that had fallen nearby, testing her balance. She looked stronger already, though Alira supposed that rest and water could work wonders on tired old bones. "You should go now," Petra said. "Even if you miss the calling, you do not want the guards finding you out here alone once darkness falls." "What about you?" I know these woods better than anyone alive, Petra said, and there was something almost amused in her tone, as if she found the question funny, in a way Alira could not understand. Go on, and Alira, remember this, whatever happens next, whatever anyone tells you about who you are, trust your own heart. It has never once led you wrong. Alira wanted to ask what she meant, but Petra was already turning away, moving into the shadows of the trees with a grace that seemed impossible for someone who had been collapsed on the ground only minutes earlier. Alira called after her, but there was no answer, only the rustle of leaves, and then silence. Standing alone in the darkening forest, Alira touched the pendant at her throat and felt that same strange warmth again. She told herself it was simply the metal warmed by her skin. She had no reason to think otherwise, not yet. By the time she made her way back toward the village, the ceremony grounds had already begun to empty. Wolves walked in pairs now, some laughing, some looking stunned, a few looking disappointed. The bonding spell had done its work for another year, marking hundreds of new matches across the kingdom. Alira slipped through the crowd unnoticed, grateful that no one seemed to have counted her absence. She made her way to the servant quarters behind the kitchens, where she shared a small room with two other girls, Nessa and Brona. Both were still out at the celebrations, so she had the room to herself. She sat on her narrow bed and finally allowed herself to feel the weight of the evening. She had missed her only chance at the ceremony, not that she had expected much from it. Servants rarely received strong matches, if they were matched at all. Still, some small part of her had wondered, just for a moment each year, what it might feel like to be chosen. She looked down at the pendant resting against her collarbone and wondered again about the strange old woman in the woods. There had been something about Petra's eyes, something that made Alira feel as though she were being looked at not as a stranger, but as someone remembered from long ago. It made no sense. She had never met the woman before in her life. Outside, the celebration continued late into the night, drums and singing carrying across the village. Alira eventually drifted off to sleep, exhausted from the day's work and the strange encounter in the woods. She did not know that, at the very same hour, chaos was unfolding at the heart of the ceremony grounds. King Kale, ruler of Blackthorn Ridge and the strongest alpha the kingdom had seen in 3 generations, stood at the center of the gathering, as the final wave of the bonding spell rolled outward across the crowd. Every wolf present had felt the pull of the magic settle into place, matching them to their fated partner. Every wolf, that is, except him. For the 3rd year in a row, the spell had reached him, and found nothing. No pull, no warmth, no answering presence anywhere in the crowd. His advisors had assured him each time that patience was needed, that not every alpha found his match quickly, that the bond would come when it was meant to come. But tonight, standing in front of his entire kingdom while whispers rippled through the assembled wolves, patience was the last thing on his mind. His closest friend and beta, a steady, broad-shouldered wolf named Finn, appeared at his side, his expression careful. "My lord, perhaps it is time to withdraw. The court is watching." "Let them watch," Kale said, his voice low and controlled, though anger simmered just beneath the surface. "I want to know why the spell failed again." "It did not fail," came a voice from behind them. Garrick, the kingdom's eldest advisor and keeper of the old records, approached with his usual slow, deliberate steps. "The spell never fails, my lord. It simply could not find its match among those present tonight." Kale turned sharply, meaning what exactly? "Meaning," Garrick said carefully, "that your intended mate was not here." The words hung in the air like a held breath. Every wolf near enough to hear them went still. An alpha's fated mate missing from the ceremony was almost unheard of. It meant either the mate did not yet exist, was too young to be marked, or, more troubling, was somewhere the spell could not reach. "Find out who was absent," Kale said. "Every single name. I want a full account by morning." "My lord, there could be dozens of reasons a wolf might miss the ceremony. Illness, distance, duty. I do not care for excuses," Kale snapped, and the wolves nearby lowered their eyes instinctively at the authority in his voice. "I have waited 3 years for an answer the moon refuses to give me. I will not wait a 4th. Find every name." Garrick bowed his head and hurried off toward the record keepers stationed at the edge of the grounds, already calling for the attendance scrolls to be brought forward. Finn remained beside Kale, watching his king's jaw tighten as he stared out over the dispersing crowd. You truly believe the spell was searching for someone specific tonight? Finn asked quietly. I felt something, Cale admitted, his voice dropping so only Finn could hear. For one moment, right at the peak of the spell, there was a pull, faint, but real, like a thread stretched taut and then suddenly cut. Finn's brow furrowed. Cut how? As if whoever it belonged to was too far away, or hidden somehow. Cale's golden eyes swept the darkening tree line beyond the ceremony grounds, toward the forest where, unknown to him, a young servant girl slept soundly, with an old woman's pendant resting against her heart. Someone out there carries the other half of my bond, Finn, and I intend to find her. The record keepers worked through the night, cross-checking every name in the kingdom against those who had stood upon the ceremony grounds when the spell was cast. It was tedious, exhausting work, made harder by the sheer size of Blackthorn Ridge and its scattered villages, but Garrick was thorough, and by the time the first light of dawn touched the palace towers, he had a list. It was a short list. Most of the missing had good reason. Injury, illness, travel too far to return in time. Only a handful had no explanation at all, and of those, only one name struck Garrick as strange enough to bring immediately to the king. A servant girl. No known family. No recorded lineage. Assigned to kitchen duties at the palace for the past 6 years, ever since she was found as a small child at the gates of the eastern village and brought into the care of the crown's staff. Her name was written plainly at the bottom of the missing list, and yet something about it made Garrick pause before he carried the scroll to the king's chambers. He could not explain why, only that something about the timing, the mystery of her origins, and the strange intensity of the bonding spell's failure all seemed to be circling the same quiet, unremarkable name. Illyra. Garrick folded the scroll carefully and made his way toward the throne room, unaware that he was about to set in motion events that would shake the foundations of the kingdom, uncover secrets buried for 18 long years, and change the fate of a lost servant girl who had only wanted to help an old woman find her way home. Morning arrived at the palace in its usual quiet rhythm. Servants moved through the halls preparing breakfast, tending fires, and readying the grand rooms for another day of court business. Illyra woke early, as she always did, and dressed for her duties in the kitchen. She said nothing to Nessa or Brona about the strange old woman, or the pendant she had tucked beneath her collar, out of sight. Something told her to keep it hidden, though she could not have explained why. She had just finished setting out trays of bread and fruit for the morning meal, when one of the palace guards appeared at the kitchen door, his expression stern and unreadable. Illyra, he said, you are to come with me. The king requests your presence immediately. The room fell silent. Every servant turned to stare. Illyra felt her stomach drop, her mind racing through every possible reason a servant girl might be summoned by the king himself, and finding none that brought her any comfort. Me? She asked, her voice smaller than she intended. Are you certain? Quite certain, the guard said. Come. He does not like to be kept waiting. Illyra set down the tray she had been holding, wiped her hands on her apron, and followed the guard out of the kitchen, her heart pounding with every step. Behind her, she heard Nessa whisper something to Brona, but she could not make out the words over the sound of her own blood rushing in her ears. She had missed the ceremony to help a stranger in the woods. Now, it seemed, the kingdom's most powerful wolf wanted to know exactly why. The walk from the kitchens to the throne room felt longer than any walk Illyra had ever taken. The guard led her through corridors she rarely saw, past tall windows where morning light spilled across polished stone floors, past portraits of past rulers whose painted eyes seemed to follow her as she passed. She kept her hands folded in front of her apron, partly out of habit, partly to keep them from shaking. She tried to think of anything she might have done wrong. Had she broken something valuable without realizing? Had someone complained about her work? Nothing came to mind, yet the guard's stern face gave her no comfort at all. When they reached the tall double doors of the throne room, 2 more guards stood at attention, and beyond them, she could hear low voices in conversation. The doors opened, and Illyra stepped inside, her breath catching at the sheer size of the room. Sunlight poured through high-arched windows, illuminating banners bearing the crest of Blackthorn Ridge, a silver wolf howling beneath a crescent moon. At the far end of the room, seated upon a great stone throne carved with images of running wolves, sat King Cale. Illyra had seen him from a distance before, during festivals and public gatherings, but never this close. He was younger than she expected for someone who ruled with such authority, though his presence filled the room in a way that made him seem far larger than his actual frame. His dark hair was cropped close, his jaw set firm, and his golden eyes, when they landed on her, seemed to look straight through every wall she had ever built around herself. Beside him stood Garrick, holding a scroll, and Finn, arms crossed, watching the exchange with quiet curiosity. "Approach," Cale said, his voice carrying easily across the vast room. Alira walked forward on unsteady legs, stopping a respectful distance from the throne and lowering herself into a careful bow. "Your Majesty," she said, "I am told you wish to see me." "You were absent from last night's ceremony," Cale said, without preamble. "Every wolf in this kingdom above the age required to bond was expected to attend, yet your name appears nowhere among those accounted for during the spell." Alira's mind raced. She had not realized her absence would draw such attention, let alone reach the ears of the king himself. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I did not mean any disrespect. I found an old woman collapsed near the forest path, and I could not leave her there alone. By the time I helped her, the ceremony had already ended." A murmur passed between Garrick and Finn. Cale's expression did not change, though something in his eyes sharpened with interest. "An old woman," Cale repeated. "Describe her." Alira blinked, surprised by the question. She had expected anger, perhaps punishment for missing a mandatory event, not curiosity about the person she had helped. She was elderly, with silver hair, and she seemed very weak when I found her. She told me her name was Petra. At the name, Garrick's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing slightly, though he said nothing. Cale leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Where is she now?" "I do not know," Alira admitted. "She walked into the forest alone after I helped her recover. I offered to accompany her, but she insisted she knew the woods well, and did not need my help any further." Cale studied her for a long moment, and Alira felt the weight of his attention like something physical pressing against her skin. It was not an unpleasant feeling exactly, but it was strange, unfamiliar, and it made her heart beat faster in a way she could not explain. "Approach the throne," Cale said quietly. Alira hesitated only a moment before obeying, stepping closer until she stood at the base of the raised platform where the throne sat. As she drew nearer, something shifted in the air between them, subtle at first, then unmistakable, a warmth that spread through her chest, exactly the way it had when Petra first placed the pendant around her neck. Only this time, it did not fade. Cale rose slowly from his throne, his golden eyes fixed on her, with an intensity that made the entire room seem to hold its breath. Finn straightened, and Garrick's grip tightened around the scroll in his hands. "My lord?" Finn asked carefully. Cale did not answer. He was staring at Alira, as though seeing something no one else in the room could see. His expression caught somewhere between disbelief and something far more complicated. The pull he had felt only once before, faint and fleeting during the ceremony, now surged through him fully, unmistakably, undeniably present in the small servant girl standing before him. "Say your name again," Cale said, his voice quieter now, almost unsteady. "Alira," she said, confused by the sudden shift in his demeanor. "Your Majesty, have I done something wrong?" Cale took a slow step down from the throne, closing the distance between them, and for the first time since she had entered the room, Alira saw something other than authority in his eyes. She saw uncertainty, wonder, and beneath it all, a question he seemed almost afraid to ask aloud. "No," Cale said softly, "I do not believe you have done anything wrong at all." Behind him, Garrick unrolled the scroll with trembling hands, scanning the names once more, as though searching for confirmation of something he already suspected, but could not yet bring himself to say. Finn watched the two of them, the king and the servant girl, standing close enough now that the air between them seemed to hum with quiet, invisible energy, and he understood, with a strange chill running down his spine, that everything in the kingdom was about to change. The throne room had gone completely silent, save for the soft crackle of torches along the stone walls. Alira stood frozen, unsure what to make of the strange warmth still spreading through her chest, or the way the king's golden eyes refused to look away from her. She glanced toward Finn, hoping for some explanation, but he only stared back at her with an expression she could not read. "Your Majesty," Garrick said carefully, stepping forward with the scroll still in his hands. "If I may. This may be the confirmation we have waited 3 years to find." Kale did not respond right away. He reached out slowly, as if testing whether the moment before him was real, and rested 2 fingers lightly against Alira's wrist. The instant his skin touched hers, the warmth in her chest surged into something stronger, a pulse of energy that traveled from her heart, down through her arm and back again, like an echo bouncing between 2 points that had finally connected after searching for each other for a very long time. Alira gasped and pulled her hand back instinctively, though the sensation did not fade. What was that? "The bonding pull," Finn said quietly, finding his voice at last. "The same one that marks every mated pair during the ceremony. Only yours activated 3 years late, and outside the ceremony grounds entirely." "That is not possible," Alira said, shaking her head. "I am no one. A servant with no family, no lineage. Surely the spell would never choose someone like me for a king." "The spell does not choose based on rank or birth," Garrick said gently. "It searches for the truest match, wherever that match may be found. Rank has nothing to do with it." Kale finally spoke, his voice low and controlled, though Alira could hear the effort it took him to keep it that way. "For 3 years, I have stood at that ceremony and felt nothing. No pull, no answer. Nothing but silence where every other wolf in this kingdom felt the spell settle into place for them. I began to wonder if I was destined to rule alone." He paused, studying her face, as though searching for something familiar in it, something just out of reach. "And now, within moments of standing near you, I feel more certainty than I have felt in 3 long years." Alira's mind spun. This could not be happening. She had woken that morning, expecting nothing more than another day of kitchen duties, and now she was being told that she was somehow fated to be mate to the Alpha King of Blackthorn Ridge. It felt impossible, like a dream she would wake from at any moment. "I do not understand how this could be true," she said quietly. "I am not from a noble family. I have no title, no wealth, nothing to offer a king." "The moon does not concern itself with wealth or title," Garrick said. "It concerns itself with truth. If the bond has chosen you, then whatever your birth, whatever your past, the spell has judged you worthy." Kale studied her a moment longer before turning to Finn. "Have the western guest chambers prepared. Alira will remain in the palace while we determine how best to proceed." "Your Majesty," Alira said quickly, "I have duties in the kitchen. Surely there are more important matters than my comfort. I do not wish to cause trouble for anyone." "You are no trouble," Kale said, and something in his tone softened, just slightly, enough that Alira noticed the change even through her confusion. "You are the answer to a question I have carried for 3 years. I do not intend to let you walk back to the kitchens as though nothing has happened." Before Alira could argue further, the doors to the throne room opened, and a tall, sharp-featured wolf strode in without waiting to be announced. He wore fine, dark clothing, and his expression carried the easy confidence of someone accustomed to walking into rooms uninvited. Alira recognized him immediately as Doran, leader of the neighboring Ashfall pack, a frequent visitor to the palace whose relationship with Kale had always seemed strained beneath a thin layer of forced courtesy. "Word travels fast within these walls," Doran said, his eyes moving from Kale to Alira with open curiosity. "I heard whispers that our king has finally found his match. I simply had to see for myself." "This is not the time, Doran," Finn said, stepping slightly forward, his posture shifting into something more guarded. "On the contrary," Doran said smoothly, "I think this is precisely the time." A missing bond finally revealed, a servant girl of unknown origin standing beside the throne. "Forgive my curiosity, but surely I am not the only one who finds this rather remarkable." Kale's jaw tightened. "Say what you mean, Doran, or leave." Doran smiled, unbothered by the sharpness in the king's voice. "Only that the kingdom will have questions. A king's mate should carry some weight of her own, some lineage worth acknowledging. I mean no offense to the girl, of course. I am simply thinking of how the court will receive this news." "The court will receive whatever news I give them, and they will accept it," Kale said firmly. "The bond does not require your approval, Doran, nor mine. It simply is." Doran inclined his head, though his sharp eyes lingered on Alira a moment longer than necessary, studying her with an intensity that made her uneasy in a way she could not quite name. Of course, Your Majesty. I only wish you both well. He turned and left as suddenly as he had arrived, though the tension he left behind lingered in the room long after the doors closed behind him. He will cause trouble, Finn said once Doran was gone. He has wanted more influence over this kingdom for years. A mate of unclear lineage gives him exactly the kind of opening he has been waiting for. Let him try, Cale said. The bond is real. Nothing he says will change that. Alira listened to the exchange with growing unease. She had come to the palace that morning, as a servant girl summoned for questioning about a missed ceremony, and now she was being spoken about, as though she were the center of some larger political struggle she did not understand, and had never asked to be part of. Your Majesty, she said carefully, I appreciate that you believe the bond to be true, but I do not know the first thing about court, about politics, about any of this. I am only a servant. Perhaps it would be best if I simply returned to my duties, and we allowed time to reveal whether the bond truly holds meaning. Cale turned to look at her fully, and for a moment, the hardness in his expression softened into something gentler, more thoughtful. You are afraid, he said, not unkindly. Of course I am afraid, Alira admitted, surprising herself with her own honesty. Yesterday I was pouring tea for visiting nobles. Today I am told I am fated to be mate to the king of the entire realm. Anyone in my position would be afraid. Cale was quiet for a moment, considering her words. Then he nodded slowly. Very well. I will not force you into a role you are not ready for, but I ask that you remain here in the palace, at least for a short while, so that we might understand what this bond truly means, both for you and for the kingdom. You will not be treated as a prisoner, nor as a servant any longer. You will have proper quarters, and time to adjust. And if, after that time, I still feel this is not the life meant for me, Alira asked. Then we will speak of it further, Cale said. I will not chain anyone to a fate they do not want, bond or no bond. But I do ask that you give it a fair chance before deciding. It seemed a reasonable request, and Alira found herself nodding, despite the whirlwind of uncertainty still spinning through her thoughts. Very well, Your Majesty. I will stay, for now. Good, Cale said, and something like relief passed briefly across his features before he composed himself once more. Finn will see that your things are moved to the western chambers. Garrick, continue your research. I want to know everything possible about how a bond might activate 3 years late, and outside the ceremony grounds entirely. There must be a reason. At once, Your Majesty, Garrick said, bowing before hurrying from the room, the scroll still clutched tightly in his hands, his mind already turning over old records and forgotten histories he had not consulted in many years. As the throne room began to empty, Alira lingered a moment, looking around at the grand space that now felt entirely different than it had when she first entered. She touched the pendant hidden beneath her collar, the one Petra had given her only the night before, and wondered again about the strange old woman and her parting words. Whatever happens next, whatever anyone tells you about who you are, trust your own heart. She had trusted her heart when she stopped to help a stranger in the woods, instead of attending the ceremony that might have changed her life in an entirely different way. Now that same choice had led her here, standing in the palace of Blackthorn Ridge, bonded to its king by a magic she did not understand, watched by advisors who seemed to sense something larger unfolding, and eyed with suspicion by a rival leader who clearly saw opportunity in her uncertain origins. Finn approached her gently, as the room finally cleared. Come, he said, let me show you to your new chambers. I imagine this has all been rather overwhelming. That is one way to describe it, Alira said, managing a small, tired smile despite everything. As they walked through the palace corridors together, Finn glanced sideways at her curiously. May I ask you something? Of course. The pendant you wear beneath your collar, he said. I noticed it when the king touched your wrist. Where did you get it? Alira's hand rose instinctively to the small silver crescent hidden beneath her dress. The old woman gave it to me. Petra. She said it needed to protect someone new. Finn's expression grew thoughtful, almost troubled, though he said nothing more on the matter as they continued down the hall. Alira did not notice the way his eyes lingered on the shape of the pendant's outline beneath her collar, nor the flicker of recognition that crossed his face, quick and quiet, gone before she could ask him what it meant. Neither of them yet knew that the pendant Alira wore had once belonged to a queen, wrapped around the neck of a newborn princess the night the palace nearly fell to ruin, carried into hiding by a healer who had sworn to protect her no matter the cost. That truth still slept, buried deep beneath 18 years of silence, waiting for the right moment to finally wake. The western chambers were larger than any room Alira had ever slept in. A wide window overlooked the palace gardens, and the bed alone seemed big enough to fit her entire old sleeping quarters twice over. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, unable to bring herself to step fully inside, as though crossing the threshold would make everything that had happened that morning permanent and real. "You may take your time settling in," Finn said, standing patiently beside her. "No one will rush you. I know this is a great deal to accept in a single day." "Thank you," Alira said quietly, "for your kindness. I did not expect to find any of it here." Finn offered a small smile. The king may seem stern to those who do not know him well, but he is fair, and he does not take the bond lightly. "Whatever happens between the two of you, know that you are safe within these walls." Alira appreciated the reassurance, though a part of her still felt as though she were standing on unsteady ground, waiting for it to shift beneath her at any moment. She thanked Finn again as he excused himself to attend to other duties, and once she was finally alone, she sat on the edge of the enormous bed and allowed herself a long, shaky breath. Word of the king's newly discovered mate spread through the palace faster than any servant could carry a tray. By midday, Alira could hear hushed voices outside her door, servants pausing in the hallway to catch a glimpse of the girl who had, overnight, gone from pouring tea to standing beside the throne. She recognized a few of the voices as friends from the kitchens, though none of them dared knock, unsure of how to approach someone whose position had changed so drastically. It was Nessa who finally worked up the courage, slipping into the room with a tray of food Alira had not requested, but was grateful for nonetheless. "I could not believe it when I heard," Nessa said, setting the tray down and studying her friend with wide eyes. "Alira, mate to the king. It sounds like something out of an old story." "It feels like one too," Alira admitted. "I still do not fully understand how any of this happened." Nessa sat beside her, lowering her voice, despite the fact that no one else was in the room. "Is it true the bond activated the moment you stood before him? That must have been remarkable to feel." "It was strange," Alira said honestly. "Warm and steady, like something settling into place that I did not know was missing. But it still does not explain why me. There are wolves of noble birth throughout this kingdom who would have made far more sense as a match for someone like him." "Perhaps the moon does not care about sense," Nessa said gently. "Perhaps it simply knows what it knows." They sat together for a while longer, Nessa filling her in on the gossip already spreading through the servant quarters, most of it exaggerated, some of it entirely invented, though Alira found some comfort in the familiar rhythm of their friendship even amid such an unfamiliar situation. Later that afternoon, a court seamstress arrived with an assortment of fine fabrics, insisting that Alira would require proper attire befitting her new position. Alira protested at first, uncomfortable with the idea of being fitted for gowns she had never imagined wearing, but the seamstress, a brisk and no-nonsense woman named Ottilie, would not be dissuaded. "The court will judge you harshly enough as it is," Ottilie said, measuring the width of Alira's shoulders with quick, practiced hands. "Do not give them fabric to add to their complaints." "They will judge me regardless of what I wear," Alira said. "Perhaps," Ottilie agreed, "but a well-made gown makes judgment harder to voice aloud." She smiled faintly, and Alira found herself smiling back, despite the exhaustion of the day. As evening approached, Alira was left alone once more, standing at the wide window overlooking the gardens below. She could see figures moving among the hedges, and further off, near the edge of the palace grounds, a familiar tall figure, in dark clothing, speaking quietly with two others she did not recognize. Doran. Even from a distance, something about his posture, the careful, deliberate way he spoke, made her uneasy. She turned away from the window and touched the pendant at her throat once more, wondering where Petra had gone, and why the old woman's parting words continued to echo in her mind. "Whatever happens next, whatever anyone tells you about who you are, trust your own heart." A soft knock came at her door. When she opened it, she found Cale standing in the hallway, no longer dressed in his formal court attire, but in simpler clothing that made him seem, for a moment, less like a king and more like an ordinary man. I wanted to see how you were settling in, he said. I imagine today has been difficult for you. It has been a great deal to take in, Alira admitted, but everyone has been kind. Finn, the seamstress, my friend from the kitchens. I did not expect that. I am glad, Cale said, and there was something genuine in his voice that eased a small measure of her unease. I know this bond was not something either of us chose in the way most wolves choose their futures, but I would like the chance to understand it properly, if you are willing. Alira studied him for a moment, this powerful king, who suddenly seemed almost uncertain standing outside her door, and found herself nodding. I am willing to try. Cale's expression eased into something close to relief, though neither of them could have known, standing there in the quiet hallway as the sun set over the palace gardens, that far below in the forest surrounding Blackthorn Ridge, an old healer sat alone beside a dying fire, staring at a faded portrait she had kept hidden for 18 years, finally allowing herself to hope that the truth might soon find its way home. A scream tore through the palace gardens just before midnight, sharp enough to bring guards running from every direction. Alira bolted upright in bed, her heart hammering, the pendant at her throat suddenly warm against her skin. She threw on a robe and hurried to her door, only to find Finn already there, his expression tense. Stay inside, he said quickly. There has been an incident near the eastern wall. What kind of incident? Alira asked, fear creeping into her voice. One of the night guards was found unconscious near the garden hedges. He is alive, but whoever attacked him moved quickly and left no trace. Finn's jaw tightened. I need to check on the king. Please, stay here until we know more. Alira nodded, though sleep was impossible after that. She sat by her window, long after Finn left, watching torches move through the garden below, guards searching every corner of the grounds. It was well past dawn before she finally learned that nothing had been stolen, and no further harm had come to anyone, though the guard remembered nothing of what struck him down. Cale visited her chambers that morning, his expression grim. I do not believe this was a random attack, he said. The guard was stationed near the path leading toward the servant quarters, toward your wing of the palace. Alira felt a chill settle over her. You think someone was trying to reach me? I think it is possible, Cale admitted, and I do not intend to take chances. From now on, you will have guards stationed outside your chambers at all times, and you will not walk the grounds alone. You believe it was Doran, Alira said, watching his face carefully. Cale did not answer right away, which told her more than words could have. I have no proof, he said finally. Only suspicion. Doran has wanted greater influence in this kingdom for years, and a mate of unclear origin threatens the stability he hoped to exploit. But suspicion is not evidence, and I will not accuse him without cause. The days that followed brought a strange new rhythm to Alira's life within the palace. She spent mornings with Cale, learning the customs and expectations of court life, though he seemed far more interested in learning about her than in lecturing her on royal protocol. She found herself telling him about her childhood in the kitchens, about Nessa and Brona, about the small joys she had found even in a life without family or title. In turn, he spoke of the weight of ruling a kingdom, of the loneliness that came with a crown, of the strange relief he felt now that the bond had finally settled into place after 3 long years of uncertainty. Slowly, carefully, something began to grow between them that neither had expected. It was not simply the pull of the bond, though that remained a steady, comforting presence whenever they were near each other. It was something quieter, built through conversation and shared laughter over small, ordinary things, the kind of connection that could not be forced by any spell, only discovered through time. But even as their bond deepened, Garrick's research into its strange late activation continued, and the results troubled him more with each passing day. He spent hours in the palace archives, poring over ancient texts on bonding magic, searching for any recorded case of a bond activating outside the ceremony grounds, delayed by years rather than moments. He found nothing that matched their situation exactly, but he did find something else entirely, buried deep within records so old the pages had begun to crumble at the edges. A record of a bonding spell used not to match mates, but to protect a bloodline, to hide a royal child from those who sought to harm her, sealing away memories and magic alike until the danger had passed and it was safe for the truth to surface once more. Garrick sat alone in the archive long into the night, staring at the fragile page before him, his mind turning over a possibility so unsettling he almost did not dare consider it. He thought of the old queen, Isolde, beloved by the kingdom and believed dead for 18 years, lost the night a coup attempt nearly toppled the crown. He thought of the newborn princess she had died trying to protect, a child whose body was never recovered, whose fate had remained one of the kingdom's most painful, unanswered mysteries. He thought of a servant girl with no known family, marked by a bond that should have been impossible, wearing a pendant that Finn had described to him in careful detail only days before, a small silver crescent wrapped around a tear-shaped stone, a design Garrick recognized immediately from old royal records as belonging to the personal collection of Queen Isolde herself. His hands trembled as he rolled up the fragile scroll, uncertain whether to bring his suspicions to the king immediately or to gather more proof first. A mistake here could cause irreparable harm, either by raising false hope or by exposing a truth too dangerous to reveal before they understood its full weight. He decided, finally, that he needed to speak with someone who might know more, someone who had served the palace long enough to remember the details of that terrible night 18 years ago. He needed to speak with Petra. Elira, unaware of the storm quietly building around her, spent that same evening walking through the palace gardens with Kale, her guards trailing at a respectful distance. The autumn air carried the scent of fading roses, and for the first time since arriving at the palace, she felt something close to peace. "You seem lighter tonight," Kale observed, glancing at her as they walked. "I think I am finally starting to believe this might not be a dream I will wake from," Elira admitted, "though I still cannot explain why the moon chose me, of all the wolves in this kingdom." "Perhaps it does not need explaining," Kale said. "Perhaps some things simply are, and questioning them too closely only steals the joy from finding them." Elira smiled at that, though a small, nagging worry still lingered in the back of her mind, one she had not yet found the courage to voice aloud. She thought of Petra, of the strange knowing look in the old woman's eyes, of her final words before vanishing into the forest. Whatever happens next, whatever anyone tells you about who you are, trust your own heart. She had trusted her heart, and it had led her here, walking beside a king, beneath a darkening autumn sky, a bond humming steady and warm between them. Yet something told her this peace would not last much longer, that the quiet comfort of the past few days was only the calm, settling briefly over a much larger storm. She did not know how right she was. 3 days later, Doran requested an audience with the king, arriving at the palace with an entourage larger than protocol typically allowed. Kale received him in the throne room, Elira seated beside him at his request, a decision that drew a flicker of surprise across Doran's face before he composed himself once more. "Your Majesty," Doran said smoothly, bowing just enough to satisfy custom without conveying any genuine deference. "I bring concerns from several neighboring pacts regarding the recent bonding, concerns that, I believe, deserve careful consideration." "Speak them then," Kale said, his tone flat. "The kingdom has always valued lineage in its royal matches," Doran said. "A tradition maintained for generations to ensure stability and trust between pacts. Forgive my bluntness, but a mate whose origins remain entirely unknown raises understandable questions among the pack leaders I represent, questions about legitimacy, about security, about whether outside forces might have influenced a bond that activated under such unusual circumstances." "Are you suggesting the bond was manipulated?" Kale asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I suggest nothing," Doran said, spreading his hands in a gesture of false innocence. "I merely relay the concerns of others, though I will say, it does seem curious that a servant girl with no recorded family would suddenly find herself bonded to the most powerful alpha in the realm, activating a spell that failed for 3 consecutive years prior." Elira felt her face flush with anger, though she held her tongue, unwilling to give Doran the satisfaction of an emotional response. Beside her, she could feel Kale's restraint straining, the low growl building somewhere beneath his controlled exterior. "The bond is not something that can be manipulated by outside forces," Garrick interjected calmly from where he stood near the throne, having arrived only moments before to observe the audience. "Its magic is ancient and precise. If it recognized Elira as the king's true mate, then that recognition is beyond question, regardless of her recorded lineage." "Recorded lineage," Doran repeated thoughtfully, his sharp eyes flicking toward Garrick with sudden interest. An interesting choice of words, advisor. As though there might be lineage that remains unrecorded. Garrick's expression did not change, though Alira noticed the faintest tightening around his eyes, as though Doran's careless observation had struck closer to some hidden truth than the man realized. She filed the moment away, uncertain what it meant, only that it left her with a strange, unsettled feeling she could not quite shake. "Your concerns have been heard, Doran," Cale said, rising from his throne, a clear signal that the audience was over. "You may relay to your fellow pack leaders that the bond stands, and it will not be undone by rumor or suspicion. Alira is my mate. That is the only truth that matters here." Doran bowed once more, his expression unreadable as he straightened. "Of course, Your Majesty. I only hope, for the kingdom's sake, that the truth proves as simple as you believe it to be." He turned and left the throne room, his entourage following close behind, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Once the doors closed, Cale let out a slow breath, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I am sorry you had to sit through that," he said, turning to Alira. "He is not wrong to have questions," Alira said quietly. "I have questions too. About who I am, where I truly came from. I have simply never had the means to find answers." Garrick, who had remained silent since Doran's departure, stepped forward slowly, his expression carefully composed, despite the storm of thoughts clearly turning behind his eyes. "Your Majesty, if I may, I believe it may be time to pursue those answers in earnest. For the kingdom's stability, and for Alira's own peace of mind." Cale studied his advisor for a long moment, sensing something unspoken beneath the careful phrasing. "You know something, Garrick." "I suspect something," Garrick corrected carefully. "Nothing more, not yet. But I believe there is someone who may hold the answers we need. Someone Alira has already met." Alira's breath caught. "Petra." "Yes," Garrick said. "I believe it is time we found her again, and asked her the questions that have gone unanswered for far too long." They left before sunrise the next day, a small group, chosen deliberately to avoid drawing attention. Cale insisted on joining them himself, despite Garrick's concern that a king should not wander into unmarked forest without a full guard. Finn came as well, along with 2 trusted guards who had served the crown for years without a single mark against their loyalty. Alira rode beside Cale, the pendant hidden beneath her cloak, her thoughts a tangled mess of hope and dread. "You are quiet," Cale observed as they rode through the misty morning woods, following the same path Alira remembered from the night of the ceremony. "I am trying not to hope for too much," Alira admitted. "For most of my life, I accepted that I would never know where I came from. Now, suddenly, there is a chance I might find out, and I do not know how to prepare myself for whatever the answer turns out to be." "Whatever you learn," Cale said, "it will not change what I already know to be true. The bond does not lie, and it chose you exactly as you are." Alira offered him a small, grateful smile, though the knot of worry in her chest did not fully loosen. She led them toward the fallen log where she had first found Petra, and from there, relying on faint memory and a few scattered details the old woman had mentioned in passing, they began searching for any sign of where she might have gone. It was Finn who eventually spotted the narrow, overgrown path leading deeper into the woods, barely visible beneath fallen leaves and creeping moss. "This looks as though it has been used recently," he said, crouching to examine the faint impressions in the soft earth. "Someone walks this way often, and carefully, avoiding leaving obvious tracks." They followed the path for nearly an hour, the forest growing thicker and quieter around them, until at last they came upon a small cottage tucked between 2 ancient oak trees, its wooden walls weathered gray with age, smoke curling faintly from a chimney that suggested someone had been there recently, though the door hung slightly ajar, as though whoever lived there had left in haste. "Petra?" Alira called out, stepping carefully toward the door. There was no answer. Cale moved ahead of her, cautious, his senses alert for any sign of danger, but the cottage appeared empty, its single room modest and sparsely furnished. A small fire had burned down to glowing embers in the hearth. A worn chair sat beside it, a blanket still draped across its arm, as though its occupant had risen only moments before and simply not returned. "She was here recently," Garrick said, examining the room carefully. "Perhaps she saw us approaching and hid herself, unwilling to be found so easily." Alira moved further into the room, her eyes drawn to a shelf along the far wall, cluttered with small jars, dried herbs, and a handful of old, worn books. Something about the arrangement felt deliberate, as though everything in the cottage had been placed with care, despite its humble appearance. Her gaze caught on something tucked behind the largest of the books, a corner of aged canvas just visible in the dim light. She reached for it carefully, drawing out a small framed portrait, its paint faded but still clear enough to make out the image within. A young woman stared back at her from within the frame, dressed in fine royal clothing, a crown of silver and pale stones resting upon dark hair, her eyes a familiar shade of warm brown that Alira had seen every day of her life, whenever she caught her own reflection in still water or polished glass. The resemblance was unmistakable. "Kale," Alira said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you need to see this." He crossed the room quickly, and the moment his eyes fell on the portrait, all the color drained from his face. He recognized the woman immediately, though he had been far too young when she vanished to remember her clearly himself. He had grown up surrounded by paintings of her throughout the palace, stories told in hushed, reverent tones by servants who still mourned her loss. "That is my mother," he said quietly. "Queen Isolde." The room fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the soft crackle of the dying fire. Garrick stepped forward, his expression grave but unsurprised, as though some quiet suspicion he had carried for days had finally found its confirmation. "I feared as much," he admitted softly. "The old bonding record, the pendant, the timing of it all. I did not want to speak the thought aloud until I had proof, but I believe, Your Majesty, that Alira may share more with your mother than a simple resemblance." Alira stared down at the portrait in her hands, her heart pounding, 1,000 questions crowding her mind at once. If this was truly a portrait of the missing queen, and if the resemblance was more than coincidence, what did that make her? A daughter, lost and hidden away for her own protection the night the palace nearly fell? Or something else entirely, something none of them had yet dared to consider? A soft creak sounded from the far corner of the cottage, and all of them turned sharply toward the sound. A narrow door, nearly hidden behind a hanging tapestry, swung open slowly, revealing a small hidden room beyond it, and standing within the shadowed doorway, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her pale eyes filled with a mixture of relief and quiet sorrow, stood Petra. "I wondered how long it would take," she said softly, "before the truth finally found its way back to this door." "You must leave this place," Petra said quickly, before anyone could ask a single question. "Now, before others learn where I have been hiding. There is little time, and much to explain." "Petra," Kale said, stepping forward, "who are you truly? Why do you have a portrait of my mother hidden in your home, and why does Alira carry her face?" Petra's eyes filled with tears, she quickly blinked away, her hands trembling slightly, as she moved further into the room. "I served your mother for many years, Your Majesty, long before you were born. I was her personal healer, trusted with secrets few others in the palace ever knew. I was with her the night everything fell apart." "The coup," Garrick said quietly, "the night Queen Isolde was lost." "Lost," Petra repeated, her voice heavy with old grief. "That is one way to describe it, though the truth is far more complicated." She turned to Alira, studying her with the same careful, searching gaze she had used the very first night they met in the forest. "I have waited 18 years to speak these words aloud, child. I only pray you are ready to hear them." "I am ready," Alira said, though her voice shook slightly. "Please, Petra, I need to know the truth." Petra nodded slowly, and gestured for them to sit, though the tension in the small cottage made stillness nearly impossible. She remained standing herself, pacing slowly, as she gathered the words that had waited so long beneath her silence. 18 years ago, a group of traitors within the palace attempted to seize the throne, she began. They believed the crown had grown too soft under King Edric's rule, and they sought to replace him with a leader more suited to their own ambitions. The attack came at night, swift and brutal, catching the palace guard off balance. Queen Isolde had given birth to her second child only weeks before, a daughter, born after Kale, whose existence was kept quiet at first, due to complications during her birth. Kale's breath caught. "A sister? I had a sister?" "You did," Petra said gently. "Though your father, in his grief, chose never to speak of her, believing it kinder to let the memory fade than to raise you beneath the shadow of a loss Neither of you could change. What happened to her? Alira asked, though some part of her already suspected the answer, some quiet, instinctive knowing, stirring beneath the surface of her confusion. The traitors moved first against the queen's chambers, believing that if they could remove her and the infant princess, the king would be too broken with grief to resist their claim on the throne. Petra continued. Isolde would not allow it. She fled with her daughter through the servant passages, using every ounce of her strength to keep the child safe. She found me in the lower halls, and together we made a desperate choice. I would take the infant into hiding, using an old protective spell to seal away any trace of her royal blood, disguising her scent, her magic, everything that might mark her as the missing princess, until it was safe to bring her home. And Queen Isolde? Cale asked, his voice tight with barely restrained emotion. Petra's face crumpled with old sorrow. She stayed behind to hold off the traitors, to give us time to escape. I do not know precisely what happened to her after that moment. The palace search afterward found no body, only signs of a struggle near the eastern tower. Most believed she perished that night, her body lost or destroyed beyond recovery. Most believed, Garrick repeated carefully, catching the careful phrasing. But you did not. Petra hesitated, glancing toward Alira with an expression that carried far more weight than her next words. I did not, because the protective spell I cast that night was never meant only for an infant. It was meant for whoever needed hiding most desperately in that moment, and it drew upon the strongest bond of magic present to complete its casting. The room went utterly silent. Alira felt her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. What are you saying? Cale asked slowly, though something in his expression suggested he had already begun to guess at the impossible truth taking shape before him. I am saying, Petra said, her voice trembling, that the infant princess did not survive that night. She was lost in the chaos, before I could reach her, taken from Isolde's arms during the struggle. When I found the queen, gravely wounded and near death herself, I made a choice no healer should ever have to make. I used the last of the protective magic, the same spell meant to hide a child, and I turned it instead upon the queen herself. Alira's hands began to shake. Petra, please, say it plainly. The spell disguised her wounds, sealed away her memories, to protect her fragile mind from the trauma of that night, and slowed the aging of her body, just enough to keep death from claiming her entirely, though it could not undo what had already been done to her. It was never meant to last 18 years. It was meant to buy days, perhaps weeks, until she healed enough to remember who she truly was. But something went wrong. The spell held far longer than intended, trapping her in a state between recovery and forgetting, aging her slowly despite her true years, until she believed herself nothing more than an ordinary orphan child left at a village gate, with no memory of the palace, the crown, or the family she had once protected with her own life. Cale stared at Alira, his golden eyes wide with a horror and disbelief that mirrored the storm rising within her own chest. Alira, he said slowly, barely able to force the words out. Are you saying that Alira is not my sister? No, Your Majesty, Petra said softly, tears finally spilling down her weathered cheeks. Alira is not your sister. She turned to face Alira fully, her voice breaking with the weight of 18 years of silence finally released. Alira, she said, you are Queen Isolde. You are Cale's mother. The words struck the room like a physical blow. Alira felt the ground seem to tilt beneath her, her mind refusing at first to accept what her ears had just heard. She looked at Cale, searching his face for some sign that this was some cruel misunderstanding, some mistake that could still be corrected, but she found only the same devastated shock reflected back at her, his golden eyes locked onto hers with an expression caught somewhere between recognition and horror. That is not possible, Alira whispered. I am younger than him. I have never carried memories of a child, of a palace, of any of this. How could I possibly be his mother? The spell aged your body to match a young woman's form, as it worked to heal what should have killed you that night, Petra explained gently. It sealed your memories so completely that you built an entirely new life around the blank space where your past should have been. You were never truly a young woman in the way the world believed you to be, Alira. You were, and are, Isolde, though the magic hid that truth even from yourself, deep enough that you never once suspected it. Cale rose slowly from where he had been sitting, moving as though every step cost him tremendous effort, and stopped several paces from Alira, staring at her, as though seeing her for the very first time. "The bond," he said hoarsely. "It activated because it recognized you, not as a mate, but as—" He could not finish the sentence. Alira felt tears rising in her own eyes, the horrifying implications settling over both of them at once. The bond that had pulled her toward the throne, that had marked her as the king's fated match in front of the entire court, had never been a romantic bond at all. It had been something else entirely, something the ancient magic had twisted and misread through the lens of Petra's desperate, incomplete spell. A mother and son's connection warped into the shape of a mate bond, because the true nature of their relationship had been buried too deeply for the spell to recognize correctly. "I am so sorry," Petra whispered, sinking into her chair, as the weight of 18 years finally broke over her. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I only wanted to save your life that night, Isolde. I never imagined the spell would twist so cruelly, or last so long, or bring you back into your son's life wearing a bond meant for mates, instead of the truth you deserved to know from the very beginning." Alira, still struggling to think of herself by any name but the one she had known her entire life, looked at Cale, her heart breaking at the devastation written so plainly across his face. "Cale," she said softly, "I do not know what to say. I do not remember being your mother. I do not remember loving your father, or holding you as a child, or any of the life Petra describes. All I know is the life I have lived these past 18 years, and now I am told none of it was truly mine to begin with." "I do not blame you," Cale said, though his voice was rough with barely restrained emotion. "None of this is your fault, or mine, but I do not know how to reconcile what I feel, standing here, with what I now know to be true." The cottage fell silent once more, the weight of the revelation settling heavily over all of them. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the ancient oak trees surrounding the small hidden home, as though the forest itself mourned the truth finally spoken aloud, after 18 long years of silence. Garrick, ever practical even amid such staggering revelation, finally spoke, his voice careful and measured. "Your Majesty, whatever this means for the bond, for both of you personally, we must consider the wider implications carefully. If word of this reaches Doran, or any other pack seeking to exploit instability within the crown, the consequences could be severe. We must decide how to proceed, and quickly." Cale nodded slowly, though his eyes remained fixed on Alira, searching her face for some trace of the mother he had lost so long ago, finding instead only the same confused, frightened uncertainty that had first drawn him to her in the throne room, back when he believed the bond between them meant something entirely different than the truth now unfolding before him. "We will find a way forward," he said finally, though his voice carried little of its usual certainty. "But first, I need to understand exactly what this spell has done, and whether there is any way to undo it." Petra wiped her eyes and nodded, rising slowly from her chair. "There may be a way," she said, "though it will not be simple, and it will not be without cost. If you are both willing to hear it, I will tell you everything I know. The spell I used that night was old, drawn from a line of protective magic, passed down through healers for generations," Petra explained, settling back into her chair, though her hand still trembled faintly. "It was designed to be reversible, but only under specific conditions. The one who cast it must be present, in good health, and full command of her power. The one bound by the spell must willingly accept the truth of who she is, without denial or resistance holding the magic in place. And the reversal must take place beneath a full moon, when the old magic runs strongest." "When is the next full moon?" Cale asked. 4 nights from now," Garrick said quietly, having already calculated the lunar calendar in his mind out of long habit. 4 nights, Petra repeated. "It is enough time, if we move carefully and keep this knowledge contained. But I must warn you both, breaking the spell will not be gentle. Isolde's body has been held in a state of suspended healing for 18 years. When the spell releases, her true age and the wounds she suffered that night may return all at once. I cannot promise what will happen when that moment comes." Alira absorbed this information with a strange, hollow calm, the shock of the past hour leaving her too numb to feel the full weight of the danger Petra described. "If it means finally knowing the truth of who I am willing to take that risk." "As am I, on your behalf," Cale said firmly, though the words seemed to cost him something deep and painful to say aloud. Whatever happens, we will face it together. They agreed to return to the palace before nightfall, moving carefully to avoid drawing attention, while Petra remained behind to gather the herbs and materials the reversal would require. She promised to make her own way to the palace, under cover of darkness in the coming days, using paths through the forest known only to herself. The journey back felt different than the ride out had been that morning. Where before there had been cautious hope, now there was only heavy, uncertain silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts, as the horses carried them through the deepening afternoon shadows. Illyra rode beside Cale, as she had before, though neither of them spoke. The strange new understanding between them, too vast and unfamiliar to put into easy words. They were perhaps halfway back to the palace, the forest thinning into more familiar terrain, when Finn suddenly reined his horse to a sharp stop, his ears pricking forward, his body tensing with the instinctive alertness of a seasoned warrior sensing danger before it fully revealed itself. "Someone is following us," he said quietly. "Has been for some time, I believe." Cale's expression hardened instantly, all traces of the day's emotional weight replaced by sharp, focused awareness. How many? Difficult to say. At least 3, perhaps more, keeping well back in the trees. Finn's hand moved instinctively to the blade at his side. They are being careful not to be seen, which tells me they do not wish for a confrontation, at least not yet. Only observation. "Doran," Garrick said grimly. "He must have set watchers on the forest paths, suspecting we would search for Petra ourselves. Or he already knows what we found," Illyra said, a cold dread settling over her. "And he is simply waiting to see what we do next." Cale's jaw tightened, his golden eyes scanning the tree line with barely restrained fury. "We keep moving," he said finally. "Stay close together. If they intended to attack, they would have done so already. For now, our priority is reaching the palace safely and deciding how to protect this secret before it can be used against us." They rode the remaining distance in tense, watchful silence, every rustle of leaves and snap of branches drawing sharp, wary glances from the small group. By the time the palace towers finally came into view, the sun had begun sinking low toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the road ahead of them. Illyra let out a breath she had not realized she was holding as the gates finally closed behind them, though the relief was short-lived. Waiting in the courtyard, his expression carefully composed into something that did not quite hide the sharp curiosity beneath it, stood Doran, flanked by 2 of his own guards, as though he had known precisely when to expect their return. "Your Majesty," Doran said smoothly, bowing with exaggerated courtesy. "I hope your journey into the forest proved fruitful. I do hear the woods around Blackthorn Ridge hold all manner of interesting secrets, if one knows where to look." Cale's expression remained perfectly controlled, though Illyra could feel the tension radiating from him, like heat from a flame. "My private affairs are not your concern, Doran." "Of course not," Doran said, his sharp eyes flicking briefly toward Illyra, lingering just a moment too long on the pendant visible at her throat, where her cloak had shifted during the ride. "Though I do hope, for the kingdom's sake, that whatever you discovered brings clarity rather than further complication." "Uncertain times call for strong, unquestioned leadership, Your Majesty. I would hate to see anything threaten that stability." Without waiting for a response, Doran bowed once more and turned to leave, his guards falling into step behind him, though the weight of his knowing gaze seemed to linger in the courtyard long after he had gone. "He knows something," Finn said quietly, once Doran was safely out of earshot, "or suspects enough to be dangerous." Cale watched the retreating figures with narrowed eyes, his hand still resting near the hilt of his blade. "Then we have less time than we thought," he said grimly. "Whatever we decide to do, we must do it quickly, before Doran finds a way to turn this secret into a weapon, against everything my mother nearly gave her life to protect." A messenger burst into the war room before dawn, breathless and pale. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but rumors are already spreading through the lower villages. Whispers that the king's mate is not what she appears to be. Some say she is cursed, others say worse." Cale's fist struck the table hard enough to make the map spread across it jump. "Doran," he said through clenched teeth. He moved faster than I expected. "He cannot know the full truth," Garrick said, though his voice betrayed his own uncertainty. "Even if his guards overheard fragments of our conversation in the forest, the details would have been impossible to catch clearly from a distance. He does not need the full truth. Finn said grimly. Rumor and suspicion are often more dangerous than fact. If the court begins to doubt the legitimacy of the bond, doubt will spread to doubt about your rule itself, Your Majesty. That is exactly the kind of instability Doran has wanted for years. Illyra stood near the window, listening to the exchange with a heavy heart. She had barely begun to process the truth of who she truly was, and already that fragile, unspoken truth was being twisted into weapons by those who wished to use it against the very people she had somehow, impossibly, once given her life to protect. "We need to speak with your father," she said suddenly, turning to face Cale. "King Edric, if anyone can confirm what Petra told us, it is him. And if this is going to come out regardless of what we do to contain it, better that the truth reaches him from us, gently, than from cruel rumor, twisted by Doran's ambitions." Cale considered this for a long moment, before nodding slowly. "You are right, he deserves to hear it from me, not from whispers in the corridors." He turned to Finn. "Increase security around the palace immediately. No one enters or leaves without thorough questioning. And send word to my father that I need to see him privately, as soon as possible." The retired King Edric lived in a smaller residence at the edge of the palace grounds, having stepped back from ruling many years earlier, still grieving a wife he believed lost forever, and a daughter he had chosen never to speak of, burying his pain so deeply that even Cale had grown up believing his father simply preferred solitude in his later years, never suspecting the depth of sorrow hidden beneath that quiet distance. Illyra walked beside Cale as they approached the modest stone house, her heart pounding with a strange mixture of dread and desperate hope. Whatever memories the spell had stolen from her, some quiet part of her wondered if seeing Edric again, if standing before the man Petra claimed had once been her husband, might stir something buried deep beneath the fog of her forgotten past. Edric answered the door himself, an older wolf, with silver threaded through his dark hair, his posture still carrying traces of the strength that had once made him a formidable king in his own right. His eyes moved between Cale and Illyra with polite curiosity that quickly shifted into confusion, and then, as he studied Illyra's face more closely, something else entirely. "Father," Cale said carefully, "may we come in? There is something important we need to discuss." Edric's gaze remained fixed on Illyra, his expression growing paler with each passing second, as though some old, buried instinct within him recognized something his conscious mind could not yet name. "Of course," he said finally, his voice unsteady. "Please, come in." They sat together in Edric's modest sitting room, and Cale, with careful, measured words, relayed everything Petra had told them the day before. Edric listened in silence, his hands trembling slightly where they rested on his knees, his eyes never once leaving Illyra's face throughout the entire account. When Cale finished speaking, a long, heavy silence stretched through the room, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth. "Isolde," Edric finally whispered, his voice breaking on the single word. "All these years, I believed you gone. I mourned you every single day, and you were alive this whole time, so close, and I never knew." "I do not remember you," Illyra said gently, her own eyes filling with tears, at the raw grief written so plainly across his face. "I wish I could tell you I do. But the spell took everything. I have no memories of a husband, of a life before the kitchens where I grew up. I am sorry." "Do not apologize," Edric said quickly, reaching out with a trembling hand, though he stopped himself before touching her, as though uncertain whether he had the right. "None of this is your doing. I only wish I had known sooner. I wish I could have spared you these 18 years of a life that was never truly yours to live." "It was still a life," Illyra said softly. "A good one, in its own way. I found kindness in the kitchens, friendship among the other servants. I do not regret the years I lived, even if they were built on a truth I never knew." Edric studied her for a long moment, something like wonder breaking through his grief. "You speak just as she did," he murmured. "Isolde always found grace in difficult circumstances. It seems that part of you survived, even beneath everything the spell tried to hide." The conversation continued long into the afternoon, Edric sharing fragments of memory Illyra had no access to herself, stories of their courtship, of Cale's birth, of the quiet joys of a life before tragedy tore it apart. Illyra listened carefully to every word, searching for some flicker of recognition, some warmth of remembered feeling, but found only the strange, hollow sensation of hearing about a stranger's life that happened, impossibly, to be her own. Petra believes the spell can be reversed, Kale said eventually, steering the conversation toward the urgent matter at hand. 4 nights from now, beneath the full moon, but we do not yet know what the reversal will cost, or whether Alira, whether my mother, will survive the process, given how long the spell has held. Edric's expression grew grave. 18 years is a long time for magic like that to hold, even old, powerful magic. I do not envy the risk you are considering, but I understand why you must take it. The truth deserves to be known, whatever the cost. There is another concern, Garrick added quietly, having remained mostly silent throughout the emotional reunion. Doran has already begun spreading rumors through the lower villages, questioning the legitimacy of the bond. If he learns the full truth before we are ready to control how it is revealed, he may use it to sow chaos throughout the kingdom, perhaps even attempt to seize power during the confusion that would follow. Edric's expression hardened at the mention of Doran's name. That man has circled this throne like a vulture for years, waiting for any sign of weakness to exploit. If he suspects even a fraction of the truth, he will move quickly to turn it against you. Which is why we cannot afford to wait, Kale said. We proceed with the reversal as planned, but we must also prepare for whatever Doran attempts in the meantime. I will not allow him to use my mother's suffering as a tool to destabilize this kingdom. As the sun began to set outside Edric's modest window, casting warm orange light across the small sitting room, Alira found herself studying the old king's face, searching once more for some spark of memory, some proof of the life Petra claimed she had once lived. She found none, only the quiet ache of loss for a past she could not reach, and a strange, hopeful curiosity about what might happen once the truth was finally, fully restored. I know this is a great deal to carry, Edric said gently, noticing the distant look in her eyes. You do not need to force any feeling that is not yet there, Isolde. Whatever memories return, or do not return, you are still the same person who showed kindness to an old woman in the forest, instead of attending a ceremony that might have changed her life in an entirely different direction. That kindness was always yours, spell or no spell. Alira offered him a small, grateful smile, though the weight of everything still unknown pressed heavily against her chest. Thank you, she said softly, for understanding, even amid your own grief. As they prepared to leave, Edric caught Kale's arm gently, holding him back for a private word, while Alira and Garrick stepped outside to wait. Son, Edric said quietly, I know this discovery must be difficult for you as well. The bond you believed yourself to share with her, twisted now into something entirely different. Are you well? Kale was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight with barely controlled emotion. I do not know what I am, Father. Relieved, perhaps, that I have not lost my mind to some cruel trick of fate. Grieved, for the years we both lost without knowing it. And afraid, terribly afraid, that the reversal might take her from me again, just as I am beginning to understand who she truly is. Edric placed a steadying hand on his son's shoulder. Whatever happens beneath that full moon, know that you are not facing it alone. I lost her once already, to a night I could not stop. I do not intend to lose either of you again without a fight. That night, back within the palace walls, Alira lay awake long after the household had quieted, staring up at the ceiling of the grand chambers that had once, impossibly, belonged to a queen who was somehow herself. She touched the pendant at her throat, the same one Petra had given her the night they first met, and wondered how much of the woman in Edric's stories still lived somewhere beneath the surface of the person she had always believed herself to be. She thought of Kale, of the strange, complicated tenderness that had grown between them over the past days, built not on the mate bond that had first brought them together, but on quiet conversations and shared vulnerability neither of them had expected to find. She wondered what would become of that fragile connection once the truth was fully restored, once the mother he had lost took the place of the mate he had believed he found. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, in the shadowed corners of Blackthorn Ridge, Doran moved through the night with his own quiet purpose, gathering allies among the discontented pack leaders who had long resented Kale's strength, whispering carefully chosen half-truths designed to plant seeds of doubt that would, in time, grow into something far more dangerous than mere rumor. The full moon was coming, and with it, a reckoning that none of them, not Alira, not Kale, not even Doran himself, could fully predict. Doran's meeting took place in a hidden hall beneath one of the abandoned watchtowers along the northern border, far from prying eyes and loyal ears. 4 pack leaders had answered his quiet summons, each carrying their own private grievances against Kale's rule, each hungry for a change they believed might finally serve their own interests better than the current crown. "The girl is not what she claims to be," Doran said, pacing slowly before the small gathered group. "My watchers followed the king's party into the deep forest, and though they could not hear every word exchanged, they saw enough. A hidden cottage, an old woman clearly connected to the royal family in ways none of us have ever been told. A portrait that sent the king himself into visible shock." "What are you suggesting?" asked one of the pack leaders, a stocky wolf named Callum from the Northern Territories. "That the girl is some kind of imposter?" "I am suggesting," Doran said carefully, "that something is deeply wrong with this bond, wrong enough that the king felt compelled to hide the truth from his own court. Whatever secret they are protecting, I intend to uncover it, and when I do, I intend to make certain the entire kingdom knows exactly how unstable this crown has truly become." "And if the secret proves harmless?" another leader asked skeptically. "If we move against the king based on rumor alone and are proven wrong, the consequences for all of us could be severe." Doran smiled thinly. "Then we will simply have gathered valuable information for another day. But I do not believe this secret is harmless. I have seen the way the king looks at that girl now, Callum. It is no longer the look of a man who has found his fated mate. It is something far more complicated, something closer to grief than desire. Whatever truth they discovered in that forest, it has shaken him deeply, and a shaken king is a vulnerable king." The pack leaders exchanged uncertain glances, though none of them openly refused to continue listening, which told Doran everything he needed to know about how easily their loyalty might be bent given the right pressure applied at the right moment. "For now," Doran continued, "we simply watch, and we wait. I have men positioned near the palace, and more watching the roads leading toward the forest. If the king and his mysterious mate make any further trips into those woods, we will know, and we will be ready to act on whatever we learn." Back within the palace, Illyra finally drifted into a restless sleep sometime past midnight, though her dreams offered little peace. She found herself walking through unfamiliar corridors that felt strangely familiar all at once, torchlight flickering against stone walls she somehow knew, without ever having seen them clearly before. A woman's voice called out softly in the distance, singing a lullaby in a language Illyra did not consciously understand, yet somehow felt in her bones as though she had heard it 1,000 times before. She followed the voice through the dream corridors until she reached a small nursery, warm firelight casting gentle shadows across a wooden cradle. She looked down into it and saw, impossibly, a dark-haired infant sleeping peacefully within, and she felt a wave of love so overwhelming it nearly stole the breath from her chest. A mother's love, ancient and certain, rising from somewhere far beneath the surface of the life she consciously remembered. She woke with a gasp, tears already streaming down her face before she fully understood why, her heart pounding, as the fading remnants of the dream slipped away like water through open fingers. She sat up in the darkness of her grand chambers, pressing a hand against her chest, trying to steady the strange, aching tenderness the dream had left behind. A soft knock came at her door only moments later. When she opened it, she found Kale standing in the hallway, his own expression troubled, as though sleep had eluded him as thoroughly as it had eluded her. "I could not rest," he admitted. "I kept thinking of everything my father told us today, trying to imagine a life I cannot fully remember either, given how young I was when it all fell apart." "I had a dream," Illyra said softly, still shaken by the lingering emotion it had left behind. "A nursery, a cradle. I felt something so powerful, Kale, a love I have never consciously experienced in my life, and yet it felt as real as anything I have ever known." Kale's breath caught. "Do you think it was a memory? Something breaking through the spell?" "I do not know," Illyra admitted. "Perhaps the reversal is already beginning to loosen its hold, now that the truth has been spoken aloud. Or perhaps it was simply my mind, trying to make sense of everything Petra and your father told us today." They stood together in the quiet hallway for a long moment, neither quite certain what to say, the strange new shape of their relationship still too unfamiliar to navigate easily. Finally, Kale spoke again, his voice gentler than Illyra had heard it before. Whatever you were to me before, whatever you become again once the spell breaks, I want you to know that these past days have meant something to me. The conversations we shared, the laughter in the gardens, the quiet comfort I found, simply being near you. I do not regret any of it, even knowing now what I know. Nor do I, Elira said softly, her heart aching with the bittersweet complexity of it all. Even if I cannot yet remember the mother I apparently once was to you, I have come to care for you deeply these past days, Kale. Whatever shape that caring takes once everything is restored, I hope we do not lose what we have found here. Kale reached out and gently took her hand, not with the charged intensity of the mate bond that had first drawn them together, but with something quieter and more enduring, the simple comfort of two people who had weathered an impossible truth together and found something worth holding on to despite it all. We will find our way through this, he said, together, whatever form that togetherness ultimately takes. Neither of them noticed the faint shadow shifting near the garden hedges below, one of Doran's watchers, well hidden among the darkened foliage, carefully noting the late-night exchange before slipping away into the night to carry word back to his master. Another small piece of information to add to the growing puzzle Doran was determined to solve, whatever the cost to the fragile peace Elira and Kale were still desperately trying to protect. Smoke curled above the eastern watchtower before dawn, and the alarm bells rang out across the palace grounds before Elira had even opened her eyes. She rushed to her window to see guards racing toward the outer wall, shouting orders, while flames licked hungrily at the wooden scaffolding surrounding the tower's base. By the time she reached the courtyard, the fire had already been contained, though the damage was clear enough. Finn stood near the smoldering wreckage, his expression dark with fury, as he examined the charred remains of what had once been a supply store for the northern guard post. Deliberate, he said grimly, as Kale arrived beside him. The fire started in 3 separate locations at once. No accident does that. Doran, Kale said, his voice tight with barely restrained anger. We cannot prove it, Garrett cautioned, hurrying over with a scroll of overnight reports clutched in his hand. But the timing is troubling. This is the 3rd incident in as many days, small, deniable acts of disruption, each one testing our defenses, each one designed to keep us distracted and off balance. Elira felt a chill settle over her as she surveyed the damage. He is trying to weaken the palace before the full moon, she said slowly. If Doran suspects something significant is planned for that night, he may be preparing to strike while our attention is divided. Then we adjust our plans, Kale said firmly. We cannot allow him to dictate the terms of this. Garrick, double the watch on every entrance. Finn, I want our most trusted guards stationed specifically around the western gardens where the reversal is meant to take place. No one outside our closest circle is to know the exact time or location. The following 2 days passed in a tense blur of preparation and quiet vigilance. Petra arrived at the palace under cover of darkness, exactly as she had promised, slipping through a servant's entrance, known only to Finn, carrying with her a small bundle of herbs and old, carefully preserved scrolls, detailing the reversal ritual in painstaking detail. She spent hours with Elira, walking her through what to expect, though even Petra admitted there was much uncertainty in a spell that had never been tested after holding for so many years beyond its intended duration. The moment the spell breaks, Petra explained gently, your body will attempt to catch up all at once, with everything the magic has been holding back. Your true age, the wounds from that terrible night, though they should have long since healed beneath ordinary circumstances. It will likely be painful, and it may take time before you feel steady again. And my memories? Elira asked. Will they return as well? I believe so, Petra said. The spell sealed them away, rather than destroying them entirely. Once released, they should return, though I cannot promise how quickly, or how completely. Elira absorbed this information with quiet determination, though a small, persistent fear continued to whisper at the edges of her thoughts. What if the woman who emerged from the reversal was someone entirely different from who she had become over these past 18 years? What if Isolde's memories, her personality, her very way of seeing the world, overwrote everything Elira had built for herself in the meantime? Would she still recognize herself when it was finished? She voiced this fear to Kale one evening as they walked together through the gardens, guards trailing at a careful distance, ever watchful since the fire. I am afraid, she admitted quietly, that whoever emerges from that reversal will not truly be me anymore. That Elira, the girl who grew up in the kitchens, who found kindness in small moments, who chose to help an old woman instead of attending a ceremony, will simply cease to exist, replaced entirely by a queen I do not yet know how to be. Kale considered her words carefully before responding. I do not believe memory alone defines a person, he said. The kindness that led you to help Petra that night in the forest, that same kindness has surely always been part of who my mother was as well, long before the spell ever touched her. Perhaps you will not lose yourself in the reversal, Elira. Perhaps you will simply discover that the two halves of who you are were never truly separate to begin with. His words offered her a measure of comfort, though the uncertainty remained, a quiet undercurrent beneath every remaining hour before the full moon arrived. They continued walking in comfortable silence for a while, the tension of recent days momentarily forgotten beneath the simple pleasure of each other's company. It was Garrick who found them eventually, hurrying through the garden with an urgency that immediately dispelled the fragile peace of the evening. Your Majesty, he said breathlessly, we have received word from one of our informants within Doran's territory. He has been gathering more than mere rumors. Several of the northern pack leaders have pledged support for a formal challenge to your rule, citing instability surrounding the mate bond as justification. They intend to bring the matter before the full council within days. Kale's expression darkened. A challenge to my rule, based on rumors he himself has spread. Convenient. There is more, Garrick continued grimly. Our informant believes Doran intends to use the full moon itself as an opportunity. He suspects, correctly it seems, that something significant is planned for that night, and he means to have his own people watching closely, perhaps even attempting to interfere directly if the situation presents an opportunity to seize control amid the chaos. Elira felt her stomach twist with dread. If Doran's people are watching the palace that closely, how can we possibly proceed with the reversal safely? If he discovers the truth of what is happening, of who I truly am, he could use it as a weapon far more dangerous than mere rumor. We will need to be clever about it, Finn said, arriving in time to catch the end of the conversation, his expression thoughtful despite the gravity of the news. A distraction, perhaps, something to draw Doran's attention, and his watchers elsewhere, while the true ritual takes place in secret. What kind of distraction? Kale asked. Finn's eyes moved toward the palace, calculating. A public announcement, perhaps. Something significant enough to demand Doran's full attention and force him to respond publicly, drawing his forces toward the main hall, while the reversal takes place quietly in the western gardens instead. Garrick considered this thoughtfully. It could work, though it would require careful timing, and no small amount of risk. What kind of announcement would be significant enough to serve as sufficient distraction? Kale was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly working through the possibilities, before his gaze settled on Elira, with a look of grim determination. We announce a formal ceremony, he said slowly, one recognizing Elira's place at my side, timed deliberately to coincide with the full moon. Doran will believe it to be nothing more than political theater, an attempt to solidify the bond's legitimacy in the face of his growing challenge. He will gather his allies to witness it, or to disrupt it, either way drawing his full attention toward the main hall. While the true reversal happens quietly elsewhere, Finn finished, nodding slowly. It is risky, but it may be our best chance to protect the ritual from interference. Elira listened to the plan taking shape around her, a strange calm settling over her despite the danger it involved. Whatever fear remained about losing herself to the reversal, whatever uncertainty lingered about the shape her future might take once the truth was fully restored, she found a quiet resolve rising to meet it. She had chosen, that first night in the forest, to help a stranger, instead of chasing her own uncertain future at the ceremony grounds. She would not shy away from this final step now, however frightening it seemed. Then let us proceed, she said, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotion still churning beneath the surface. Whatever Doran plans, whatever risks the reversal carries, I would rather face the truth fully than continue living in the shadow of a stolen past. Kale looked at her with something close to pride shining in his golden eyes, alongside the quiet grief he still carried at the thought of what the reversal might cost them both. Then it is decided, he said. 3 nights from now, beneath the full moon, we finish what began the night you knelt beside an old woman in the forest and chose kindness over your own uncertain future. The days that followed passed in careful, quiet preparation. each of them playing their part in the delicate plan taking shape, while beyond the palace walls, Doran continued gathering his allies, entirely unaware that the very ceremony he believed he understood was nothing more than a carefully constructed shield, protecting a truth far more significant than anything he had yet imagined. The formal announcement went out the very next morning, carried by royal messengers to every corner of the kingdom. Word spread quickly that King Kale intended to hold a grand ceremony beneath the coming full moon, formally recognizing his bonded mate before the entire court, and inviting representatives from every pack, including those who had begun to question the legitimacy of the bond itself. As expected, the announcement drew swift response from Doran's camp. Within a day, word returned through Garrick's informants that Doran had begun rallying his allies, instructing them to attend the ceremony in force, prepared to raise formal objections before the assembled nobility, if given the opportunity. He believed, just as they had hoped, that the ceremony represented Kale's attempt to solidify public support before Doran's planned challenge could gain further traction. "He is taking the bait," Finn reported, having spent the better part of 2 days gathering intelligence through trusted contacts within the Northern Territories. "He plans to arrive with a significant escort, enough to make a visible statement of strength before the court, but not so large as to appear openly hostile. He still believes subtlety serves his purposes better than open confrontation, at least for now." "Good," Kale said. "Let him focus his energy on the main hall. The more attention he places there, the less he will have remaining to notice what happens quietly in the Western Gardens." Illyra spent much of those final days with Petra, continuing to prepare for the ritual ahead, though her thoughts often drifted toward the strange dreams that had begun visiting her nearly every night since her conversation with Edric. Fragments of memory, brief and disjointed, flickered through her sleeping mind with growing frequency. A garden much like the one at the palace, though somehow different, older. A man's laughter, warm and familiar, though she could never quite picture his face clearly enough to know if it belonged to Edric. A child's small hand wrapped around her finger, and the overwhelming rush of love that memory carried with it each time. "The spell is weakening," Petra observed one afternoon, watching Illyra describe another fragment of dream from the previous night. "The reversal ritual will simply finish what has already quietly begun. I believe your true self has been fighting to surface for some time now, ever since the bond first activated and drew you back into contact with your son." "It is strange," Illyra admitted, "feeling as though I am two people at once. The girl who grew up believing herself an orphan, content with small kindnesses and quiet days in the kitchens, and somewhere beneath that, a queen, a mother, carrying grief and love I cannot yet fully access, but which I feel pressing against the edges of my mind more forcefully each day." "You are not two people," Petra said gently. "You are one person, whose story simply took an unexpected detour. Whatever comes when the spell finally breaks, know that the kindness you showed me that night in the forest was always genuinely yours," I sold. "It did not belong only to Illyra. It has always been part of who you truly are, spell or no spell." Illyra found comfort in those words, even as the weight of the coming ritual pressed more heavily against her with each passing hour. On the final evening before the full moon, she stood once more at her window, looking out over the palace gardens bathed in the soft silver light of the nearly complete moon, and allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection on everything that had brought her to this point. A servant girl who helped a stranger instead of attending a ceremony, a bond that activated outside its proper time, drawing her into a palace she never expected to enter. A truth so impossible it had shattered everything she believed about herself, and yet, somehow, had not broken her. Tomorrow night, beneath the light of the full moon, she would finally discover exactly who she truly was, and whether the woman who emerged from that ancient magic would still recognize the kindness, the courage, and the quiet strength that had carried her through every uncertain step of the journey so far. Horns sounded across the palace grounds as the first guests began arriving for the ceremony, and Illyra's heart pounded with a fear that had nothing to do with nerves over a false celebration. Somewhere beneath the noise and spectacle of the main hall, the true purpose of the night waited quietly in the Western Gardens, and every moment that passed brought her closer to a truth that might unmake everything she had known about herself. The main hall filled quickly with nobles and pack leaders from across the kingdom, their voices a low, curious murmur as they took their places among the gathered crowd. Doran arrived precisely as expected, flanked by a dozen of his most loyal allies, his expression carefully composed into polite interest that did not quite mask the sharp calculation behind his eyes. Cale stood at the head of the hall in formal attire, playing his role with practiced control, though Alira, watching from a side chamber where she waited with Finn and two trusted guards, could see the tension in his shoulders even from a distance. This was the moment their plan would either succeed or unravel entirely. "It is time," Finn said quietly, checking the position of the moon through a narrow window. "Garrick has confirmed Doran's attention is fully fixed on the main hall. We should move now, while the distraction holds." Alira nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she followed Finn through a quiet servant's passage leading toward the western gardens, her heart racing, with a mixture of dread and determination. Behind her, in the main hall, she could hear Cale's voice rising above the crowd, beginning a formal address designed to hold every eye and ear in the room for as long as possible. The western gardens waited in silence beneath the full moon, its silver light pooling across the carefully tended hedges and flowering paths, transforming the familiar space into something almost otherworldly. Petra stood at the center of a small clearing, surrounded by a careful arrangement of candles and herbs, her expression grave but steady as Alira approached. "Are you ready?" Petra asked softly. "As ready as I will ever be," Alira said, though her voice trembled slightly, despite her best efforts to remain calm. "Remember what I told you," Petra said, guiding her gently to the center of the clearing. "The pain will be brief, but intense. Do not fight it. Let the magic finish what it was always meant to do, and trust that whoever you become on the other side will still carry everything good and true about who you have always been." Alira nodded, closing her eyes as Petra began the ritual, her voice rising into an old, unfamiliar chant that seemed to resonate through the very ground beneath their feet. The pendant at Alira's throat began to glow with a soft silver light, warm against her skin, growing steadily brighter as the chant continued, the full moon's light seeming to intensify in response, pooling around them, until the entire clearing shimmered with pale, ethereal brilliance. Alira felt the change begin deep within her chest, a strange, pulling sensation that quickly spread outward through her entire body, gentle at first, then building with startling speed, into something far more intense. She gasped, as memories began flooding back, all at once. No longer fragmented dreams, but full, vivid recollections crashing over her like a tidal wave breaking against the shore. She remembered her wedding to Edric, young and hopeful, standing beneath a different full moon many years before. She remembered the birth of her son, Cale, the overwhelming love that had filled her the first time she held him in her arms. She remembered the quiet joy of learning she carried a second child, and the terrible night everything shattered around her, traitors moving through the palace halls with cruel purpose, her desperate flight through hidden passages with her infant daughter clutched tightly against her chest. She remembered the pain of losing that tiny, precious life in the chaos of the struggle, a grief so profound it nearly stopped her heart entirely, and she remembered Petra finding her afterward, gravely wounded, whispering desperate words of protective magic, as darkness closed in around her vision. Alira cried out, sinking to her knees, as the weight of 18 years of buried memory and grief crashed over her all at once, her body trembling with the force of it. Finn moved forward instinctively to help her, but Petra held up a firm hand, warning him back. "She must finish this alone," Petra said, though her own voice shook with the strain of maintaining the ritual's careful balance. Interrupting now could be far more dangerous than letting it run its course. The transformation continued, visible now, in ways beyond mere memory. Alira's form seemed to shift subtly beneath the moonlight, small lines appearing at the corners of her eyes, her posture straightening into something more regal, more certain, the quiet uncertainty of a servant girl, slowly giving way to the composed bearing of a woman who had once ruled a kingdom at her husband's side. Just as the ritual reached its final, critical moment, a sharp cry rang out from the edge of the garden. Finn spun around, blade already drawn, to find one of Doran's watchers, apparently posted near the garden's outer wall despite their careful precautions, staring in open shock at the scene unfolding before him. "Stop him," Petra gasped, her concentration wavering dangerously as she struggled to maintain the ritual's delicate balance. If he escapes to warn Doran now, everything could be ruined. Finn moved with practiced speed, closing the distance before the watcher could turn to flee, though the brief struggle that followed drew enough noise to threaten the secrecy they had worked so carefully to maintain. Elira, still caught in the grip of the ritual's final surge, barely registered the commotion, her entire being focused on weathering the storm of memory and transformation crashing through her. "Almost there," Petra called out, her voice strained with effort. "Hold on just a moment longer." With a final, brilliant flash of silver light that illuminated the entire garden as brightly as midday sun, the ritual reached its completion. The glow faded slowly, leaving the clearing bathed once more in ordinary moonlight, and where a young servant girl had knelt only moments before, a woman now knelt in her place, older, marked by the passage of 18 true years, her dark hair streaked with the first traces of silver, her face carrying the unmistakable dignity and quiet strength of a woman who had once ruled a kingdom and survived unimaginable loss to do so. Isolde opened her eyes slowly, drawing a deep, shuddering breath, and looked up to find Petra kneeling beside her, tears streaming freely down the old healer's weathered face. "Isolde," Petra whispered, "you have returned to us." "Petra," Isolde said, her voice carrying new depths of memory and understanding that had not been present in Elira's uncertain tone. "You saved my life that night. You have carried this secret alone for 18 years, protecting me, even when I could not remember to thank you for it." "You would have done the same for me," Petra said softly, helping her rise carefully to her feet. Isolde swayed slightly, adjusting to the sudden weight of her true age, and the healing wounds finally settling into her body after so many years, suspended by the spell's protective magic. She looked around the moonlit garden, taking in every detail with newfound clarity, before her gaze fell upon Finn, who had successfully subdued Doran's watcher, and now stood guard over the restrained figure with careful vigilance. "We must move quickly," Isolde said, her voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to command, even after so many years of forgetting she possessed it. If that man managed to send any signal to Doran, before Finn reached him, our secrecy may already be compromised. As if summoned by her very words, the sound of raised voices and hurried footsteps echoed from the direction of the main hall, growing steadily louder as they approached the garden. Moments later, Kale appeared at the garden's entrance, his formal attire disheveled from what had clearly been a hasty departure from the ceremony, his expression a mixture of urgent concern and desperate hope. He stopped abruptly at the sight before him, his golden eyes widening as he took in the transformed woman standing beside Petra in the moonlight, the mother he had lost 18 years ago now standing before him in full, restored truth. "Mother," he breathed, the single word, carrying the weight of a lifetime of unknowing grief, finally, impossibly, resolved. "Kale," Isolde said, her voice breaking with emotion as she moved toward him, closing the distance between them with unsteady but determined steps. "My son, look how you have grown, how strong you have become." They embraced tightly, both of them overwhelmed by the reality of a reunion neither had ever truly expected to experience. 18 years of separation collapsing into a single, tearful moment beneath the full moon's watchful light. Finn watched the reunion with visible emotion of his own, while Petra stood quietly nearby, finally allowing herself to feel the relief of a burden carried alone for far too long. But the moment of joy was short-lived. Doran's captured watcher, seizing an opportunity created by the emotional distraction, suddenly wrenched free from Finn's grip and bolted toward the garden wall, moving with the desperate speed of someone who knew exactly how valuable the information he carried had become. "Stop him!" Finn shouted, already giving chase, but the watcher had a significant head start, disappearing over the low garden wall before anyone could catch him, vanishing into the darkness beyond the palace grounds. Kale's expression hardened instantly, the joy of reunion tempered immediately by the return of urgent, practical concern. "He will reach Doran within the hour," he said grimly. "Whatever secrecy we hope to maintain has likely already been lost." "Then we prepare for what comes next," Isolde said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion still visible in her newly restored features. "I did not survive that terrible night and endure 18 years of forgotten exile, only to watch this kingdom fall into chaos now. Whatever Doran intends to do with this knowledge, we will face it together, as a family should have faced everything from the very beginning." Kale looked at his mother with fierce pride and determination, the two of them standing together beneath the full moon's fading light, ready to face whatever confrontation the coming hours would surely bring. Word of the escaped watcher reached Doran faster than anyone in the palace had hoped. By the time Cale and Isolde returned to the main hall, moving carefully to avoid drawing immediate attention while Isolde's strength continued to steady, they found the ceremony already dissolved into confused murmuring, guests whispering among themselves as they noticed Doran and his allies had gathered near the far entrance in a tight, urgent cluster. Garrick met them just inside the hall, his expression tense. The watcher reached him. He confirmed quietly, "I saw the man arrive breathless only minutes ago," and Doran's entire demeanor shifted the moment he heard whatever news was delivered. He knows something significant has happened, even if he does not yet understand the full shape of it. "Then we control the narrative before he can twist it into something dangerous," Cale said firmly. "Better the truth comes from us, spoken with dignity, than distorted through Doran's ambition." He turned to his mother, studying her face carefully. "Are you strong enough for this? You do not have to face the court tonight if you are not ready." Isolde straightened, drawing on reserves of composure that had clearly served her well during her years as queen. "I have hidden from this kingdom long enough, Cale, though never by my own choice. I am ready to stand before them now, as myself, for the first time in 18 years. They entered the main hall together, and the murmuring crowd fell into stunned silence as they took in the sight before them, an unfamiliar woman, of clear royal bearing, walking beside the king, her resemblance to the portraits of the long-lost Queen Isolde, unmistakable to anyone who had lived in the kingdom long enough to remember her. Doran stepped forward from among his allies, his expression carefully composed despite the obvious surprise flickering behind his sharp eyes. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying just enough volume to reach the gathered crowd. "It seems tonight's ceremony has taken quite an unexpected turn. Perhaps you would care to explain to the court exactly who now stands beside you, given that she bears little resemblance to the servant girl we were told carried the bond only days ago." Cale met his gaze evenly, refusing to be baited into a defensive posture. "I will explain everything, Doran, though not because you have demanded it. This kingdom deserves the truth, and tonight, they shall have it." He turned to address the full assembly, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed hall. 18 years ago, this kingdom lost its queen. The night traitors attempted to seize the throne. We believed her dead, her body lost in the chaos of that terrible night. Tonight, I stand before you to tell you that belief was wrong. Through desperate protective magic, my mother survived, though the spell that saved her life also stole her memories and disguised her true identity for 18 long years, hidden even from herself. Gasps rippled through the assembled crowd, nobles and pack leaders exchanging astonished glances as the weight of the revelation settled over the hall. "The bond that activated between myself and the young woman known as Alira," Cale continued, "was never a mate bond at all. It was the ancient magic recognizing a connection between mother and son, twisted through the incomplete nature of the protective spell, into a form neither of us initially understood. Tonight, beneath the full moon, that spell was finally, safely reversed. My mother, Queen Isolde, stands restored before you." The hall erupted into a chaos of astonished murmurs, some faces reflecting genuine joy at the miraculous return of a beloved queen long mourned, others reflecting the calculating suspicion of those who saw only opportunity in the sudden upheaval of the crown's stability. Doran allowed the noise to settle somewhat before speaking again, his voice carrying a note of practiced concern that did not quite mask the sharp interest beneath it. "A remarkable tale, Your Majesty, though I confess, it raises as many questions as it answers. If the bond that first brought this woman into the palace was never a true mate bond, what does that mean for the legitimacy of her presence here now? And more pressingly, what does it mean for the stability of a crown that has, by its own admission, been operating under significant confusion regarding its most fundamental relationships?" "It means," Isolde said, stepping forward to speak for herself for the first time, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a woman who had once ruled this very hall with grace and strength, "that this kingdom's rightful queen has returned to stand beside her son, exactly as she should have been able to do these past 18 years, had traitors not stolen that right from both of us. It means, Doran, that whatever ambitions you have nursed during my long absence, you would do well to remember precisely who you are speaking to now." The hall fell into stunned silence at the sheer force of her presence, and even Doran, for all his practiced composure, seemed momentarily caught off balance by the transformation from uncertain servant girl to commanding former queen standing directly before him. He recovered quickly, however, bowing with exaggerated courtesy that did little to hide the calculation still working behind his eyes. "Welcome home, Your Majesty," he said smoothly. "I am certain the entire kingdom rejoices at your miraculous return. Though I do hope, for everyone's sake, that this remarkable revelation does not distract from more practical concerns regarding the Crown's current leadership and its readiness to face the challenges ahead." "The Crown's leadership," Cale said firmly, stepping beside his mother, "remains exactly as strong and legitimate as it has always been. My mother's return changes nothing about my right to rule this kingdom, Doran. It only adds another voice of wisdom and experience to guide it forward." Doran's smile remained fixed in place, though something colder flickered briefly behind his eyes, before he bowed once more and withdrew with his allies, the tension in the hall slowly beginning to ease, as the shock of the evening's revelations settled into cautious, curious acceptance among the gathered nobility. But Isolde, watching Doran's retreating figure with the sharp, experienced eyes of a woman who had once survived a palace coup, felt a familiar chill of warning settle over her. Whatever composure Doran had displayed tonight, she recognized the look in his eyes far too well, the same calculating patience she remembered from certain courtiers in the days before the traitors had finally made their move, 18 years earlier. "This is not over," she said quietly to Cale, as the hall slowly began to empty. "He will not accept this setback easily. We must prepare ourselves for whatever he attempts next." Cale nodded grimly, his hand resting protectively near his mother's shoulder. "Then we prepare together, exactly as you said in the garden. Whatever comes, this family will not be broken apart again." Bells rang out across the palace before sunrise, urgent and insistent, pulling Isolde from a rare, peaceful sleep. She rose quickly, her body still adjusting to the weight of her true age after so many years suspended by Petra's spell, and made her way toward the sound of raised voices echoing from the main courtyard. She found Cale already there, along with Finn and a dozen guards, all of them staring toward the northern road, where a substantial gathering of wolves approached the palace gates, banners bearing the crests of several allied packs visible among the crowd. "Doran has moved faster than we expected," Garrick said grimly, arriving at Isolde's side with a scroll clutched tightly in his hand. "He has called for a formal council session, citing emergency concerns over the Crown's stability. He has gathered enough allied pack leaders to force the matter, regardless of whether the king wishes to grant the request." "On what grounds?" Isolde asked sharply. "On the grounds," Garrick said carefully, "that last night's revelations demonstrate a pattern of concealment and confusion at the highest levels of the Crown, sufficient to warrant a formal review of the king's fitness to rule during what he is calling an unprecedented crisis of legitimacy." Cale's jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. "He seeks to use my mother's miraculous survival, something that should be celebrated as a victory for this kingdom, as a weapon to weaken my authority." "It is precisely what he has wanted for years," Isolde said, her voice steady despite the concern evident in her eyes. "An opening to challenge the Crown, without appearing to act out of pure ambition. He has found his opening now, and he will not hesitate to use it." The council session convened within hours, held in the Grand Hall before an assembly far larger than the previous night's ceremony, word of the extraordinary circumstances having spread rapidly enough to draw representatives from nearly every pack within the kingdom's borders. Isolde took her place beside Cale at the head of the hall, her posture regal despite the exhaustion still lingering beneath her composed exterior, while Doran stood at the center of the assembled council, clearly relishing the attention his gathered allies had drawn. "Your Majesty," Doran began, his voice carrying practiced solemnity, "I do not bring this challenge lightly, but the kingdom deserves stability and clarity, particularly during times when the very foundations of the Crown's legitimacy have been called into question. Last night, we learned that a bond believed sacred and unbreakable was in truth a case of mistaken magic. We learned that a queen believed dead for 18 years has returned, restored through means many among us do not fully understand, and which some fear may not have been entirely safe or sanctioned by proper tradition. The reversal was performed with full knowledge and consent," Cale said firmly, By the very healer who saved my mother's life 18 years ago. There was nothing improper about it. Perhaps not, Doran conceded smoothly, though the council was not consulted, nor informed, until after the fact. Some among us find that troubling, Your Majesty. A pattern of decisions made in secrecy, without proper counsel, raises legitimate concerns about transparency at the highest levels of this crown. Murmurs of agreement rippled through a portion of the assembled council, enough to make clear that Doran's carefully cultivated alliances had done their work in the days leading up to this moment. Isolde watched the exchange with sharp, careful attention, recognizing the same patient, methodical strategy that had once nearly toppled the throne entirely, 18 years before. I would ask the council this, Isolde said, rising to address the hall directly, her voice carrying easily, despite its quiet steadiness. When traitors moved against this very throne 18 years ago, was proper counsel consulted before they struck, or did they, too, act in secrecy, using confusion and division to weaken a crown they wished to seize for themselves? The hall fell silent at the pointed comparison, several council members shifting uncomfortably as Isolde's words settled over them. I make no accusation without cause, she continued, her gaze moving deliberately across the assembled faces before settling, finally, on Doran himself. I simply observe that those who seek to divide a kingdom often disguise their ambition as concern for stability. I lived through that lesson once already, at great personal cost. I would ask this council to consider carefully whose interests are truly being served by this sudden challenge to my son's rule. Doran's composure flickered, just slightly, before he recovered his practiced calm. Your Majesty, I mean no disrespect to your remarkable return, nor to the clear suffering you endured these past 18 years. I simply believe, as do many gathered here today, that the kingdom deserves full transparency moving forward, and perhaps a formal review of succession and authority, given the extraordinary circumstances we now find ourselves navigating. A review, Cale said coldly, that would conveniently place the crown's authority into question, at precisely the moment you have gathered enough allied support to benefit from that uncertainty. I resent the implication, Your Majesty, Doran said, though his tone carried little genuine offense. I act only out of concern for this kingdom's well-being. The council session continued for hours, tempers rising and falling, as various pack leaders voiced their own concerns, questions, and, in some cases, quiet support for Cale's continued rule. Isolde watched carefully throughout, noting which leaders seemed genuinely swayed by Doran's rhetoric, and which merely sought to protect their own interests amid the uncertainty. Information she filed away carefully for whatever confrontation might still lie ahead. By the time the session finally concluded, no formal vote had been called, though Doran had succeeded in planting enough doubt among the assembled council to ensure the matter would not be easily dismissed. He requested, and was granted, a follow-up session within the week, during which time the council would continue deliberating on whatever formal review might be deemed necessary. He has bought himself time, Finn said grimly, once the hall had finally emptied. Time to continue gathering support, to press his advantage while doubt still lingers among the council. Then we use that same time to our advantage, Isolde said. I did not survive 18 years of forgotten exile, only to watch my son's rightful throne stolen out from under him, through careful manipulation and false concern. We will meet with each council member individually if necessary, address their genuine concerns honestly, and expose Doran's ambition for exactly what it is, before he can gather enough support to force a true crisis. Cale looked at his mother with quiet admiration, recognizing in her careful, measured strategy the same strength that had once made her a beloved and respected queen throughout the kingdom. You have not lost your gift for navigating court politics, it seems, despite everything the spell took from you. Some things, it appears, run deeper than memory alone, Isolde said, a small, tired smile touching her lips, despite the exhaustion of the day. Come. We have much work ahead of us, and precious little time to accomplish it. That evening, as the palace finally settled into a tense, watchful quiet, Isolde found herself walking alone, through the same western gardens where the reversal had taken place, only the night before. She paused near the spot where she had knelt beneath the full moon, memories flooding back with fresh clarity, and allowed herself a rare moment of quiet reflection amid the storm of political maneuvering consuming every waking hour. She thought of Alira, the young woman she had been for 18 unknowing years, and felt no resentment toward that identity, only a strange, tender gratitude for the kindness that identity had carried through every uncertain day. She thought of Cale, grown now into a strong and capable king, carrying burdens she wished she could have helped him shoulder these past 18 years. And she thought of Doran, whose ambition threatened to unravel everything she had fought so desperately to protect, both 18 years ago and now. A soft rustle in the hedges nearby drew her attention, and she turned sharply, old instincts sharpened by survival flaring immediately to alertness. A figure emerged from the shadows, and for a brief, tense moment, Isolde feared the worst, before recognizing the familiar, weathered face of Petra stepping into the moonlight. "You gave me quite a fright," Isolde said, exhaling slowly as her racing heart began to settle. "Forgive me," Petra said, though her expression carried none of its usual gentle warmth, replaced instead by grave, urgent concern. "I would not have disturbed you tonight if the matter were not serious. I have learned something you need to hear immediately, something that may explain far more about Doran's sudden boldness than mere political ambition alone." "Tell me," Isolde said, her voice tight with apprehension. Petra glanced around the quiet garden before continuing, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I have spent these past days quietly asking questions among old contacts, wolves who served the palace during the years before the coup, before I went into hiding with you. I wanted to understand why Doran has grown so bold, so quickly, in pressing this challenge against Cale's rule. And what did you learn?" "I learned that Doran's father served among the traitors 18 years ago," Petra said grimly. "Quietly, carefully, never directly implicated when the coup ultimately failed and its known conspirators were dealt with. He managed to distance himself enough to avoid suspicion, and when he died some years later, Doran inherited leadership of the Ashfall Pack, without anyone ever connecting him to his father's true loyalties." Isolde felt a cold chill settle over her. "You believe Doran shares his father's ambitions?" "I believe," Petra said carefully, "that Doran has spent years quietly building toward exactly this moment, waiting for an opportunity to finish what his father failed to accomplish 18 years ago. Your return, and the confusion surrounding it, has simply given him the opening he has been patiently waiting for all this time." Isolde absorbed this information with grim, steady resolve, old instincts from her years as queen sharpening into focus despite the exhaustion still lingering in her newly restored body. "Does Cale know this?" "Not yet," Petra said. "I wanted to bring it to you first, given how carefully this must be handled. If we accuse Doran without solid proof, he may simply use the accusation itself as further evidence of instability within the crown, exactly as he did with the reversal ritual." "Then we need proof," Isolde said firmly. "Something undeniable enough to expose him before the full council, before he can gather enough support to force a genuine crisis." "There may be a way," Petra said slowly, clearly having already considered the matter carefully before bringing it to Isolde's attention. Records from that time, detailing the full investigation into the coup, were sealed away in the palace archives afterward, deemed too sensitive for public release, given how many prominent families were implicated in various ways. If those records still exist, they may contain evidence connecting Doran's father, and by extension Doran himself, to the conspiracy, in ways that cannot be easily dismissed. "Garrick would know where such records might be kept," Isolde said. "We should bring him into this immediately, along with Cale. This is too significant a matter to pursue without their knowledge." They found Cale and Garrick still awake in the war room, poring over reports from various contacts throughout the kingdom, and Isolde relayed Petra's information with careful, measured precision, watching her son's expression harden with each new revelation. "His father," Cale said slowly, processing the weight of the news, "all these years, serving on the council, offering counsel and support, while quietly harboring the same ambitions that nearly destroyed this kingdom once already." "We cannot act on suspicion alone," Garrick cautioned, though his own expression carried grave concern. "But I do recall the sealed archive Petra mentions. It has remained untouched since the investigation concluded, stored deep within the palace's oldest wing, accessible only with proper authorization from the crown itself." "Then we authorize it," Cale said firmly. "Tonight, if possible. We need whatever proof exists before the council reconvenes, or Doran will continue gathering support unchecked while we hesitate." The archive proved more difficult to access than anticipated, its ancient locks having rusted with decades of disuse, requiring careful work from the palace locksmith before the heavy iron door finally creaked open sometime past midnight. Inside, towering shelves of forgotten records stretched into shadowed darkness, thick with dust and the musty scent of age. Garrick moved through the shelves with practiced efficiency, guided by decades of familiarity with the palace's archival systems, while Cale and Isolde searched alongside him, each of them driven by the urgency of the ticking clock, counting down toward the council's follow-up session. It was Isolde herself who finally found the sealed box containing the full investigation records, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted the heavy lid, revealing stacks of aged parchment detailing testimony, evidence, and careful notes compiled by investigators in the difficult months following the failed coup. She worked through the documents methodically, her old skills as queen returning to guide her careful, thorough search, until finally, near the bottom of the box, she found what they had been searching for. A sealed testimony, given by one of the captured conspirators before his execution, naming several additional traitors who had managed to escape justice through careful denial and lack of sufficient evidence at the time. Among the names listed clearly in faded ink was Doran's father, described specifically as one of the coup's key financial supporters, providing resources and safe passage for the traitors in exchange for promised influence once the crown had been successfully seized. "We have it," Isolde said quietly, her voice carrying a mixture of vindication and lingering grief for the terrible night this evidence finally confirmed in full detail. "Proof enough, I believe, to expose Doran's family history before the full council." Cale studied the document carefully, his expression grim with the weight of what it revealed. "This changes everything," he said. "Doran is not merely exploiting confusion for political advantage. He is finishing what his father began 18 years ago, using my mother's return as the perfect opportunity to weaken this crown from within, exactly as they once tried to do through open violence. Then we ensure he does not succeed," Isolde said firmly, closing the box with careful, deliberate resolve. "Tomorrow, we bring this evidence before the council, and we finally put an end to the shadow his family's ambition has cast over this kingdom for far too long." A guard burst into the war room at dawn, his face pale with alarm. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but Doran has moved the council session forward. He has summoned every allied pack leader to the main hall within the hour, claiming urgent new evidence has come to light regarding the crown's instability." Cale and Isolde exchanged a sharp, knowing glance. "He knows we found something," Isolde said grimly. "He must have watchers even within the archive wing. He means to strike first, before we can present our own evidence." "Then we move immediately," Cale said, already gathering the sealed testimony documents Isolde had recovered the night before. "We cannot allow him to control the narrative in that hall." They arrived at the main hall, to find it already filling rapidly, the atmosphere tense and charged with anticipation as word of the emergency session spread through the palace. Doran stood at the center of the gathered council, flanked by a larger contingent of allied guards than he had brought to any previous meeting, his expression carrying a confidence that immediately set Isolde's instincts on edge. "Your Majesty," Doran said as Cale and Isolde took their places, "I apologize for the abrupt timing, but I received troubling information overnight that I felt could not wait. Information suggesting that certain parties within this palace have been conducting unauthorized searches through sealed archives, searches that raise serious questions about what secrets the crown may still be hiding from this council." "The crown hides nothing," Cale said firmly, though he recognized immediately the dangerous game Doran intended to play, twisting their own discovery into further evidence of his manufactured crisis. "We sought records relevant to the very coup that nearly destroyed this kingdom 18 years ago. Records that, as it happens, reveal information this council deserves to hear." "Then let us hear it," Doran said smoothly, though something flickered briefly behind his composed expression, a flash of uncertainty quickly masked. Isolde stepped forward, unrolling the sealed testimony with steady, deliberate hands, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed hall as she read the damning words aloud, naming Doran's father among the conspirators who had funded and supported the traitors 18 years earlier. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembled council as the weight of the revelation settled over the room, several pack leaders turning sharp, questioning gazes toward Doran himself. For a long moment, Doran said nothing, his composure visibly cracking under the sudden shift in the hall's attention. Then, slowly, his expression hardened into something colder, more dangerous, the careful mask of political ambition, finally slipping away to reveal the calculating determination beneath it. "My father's choices were his own," Doran said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I did not inherit his guilt along with his title." "Perhaps not," Isolde said, "though it seems you have inherited his ambition well enough, using my return, and the confusion surrounding it, to pursue exactly the same goal he once sought through open treachery." "You know nothing of my goals," Doran snapped, and the sudden shift in his tone drew wary glances from several allied pack leaders standing near him, clearly unsettled by the crack in his careful composure. "Do I not?" Isolde said, her voice steady despite the tension crackling through the hall. "I have seen this pattern before, Doran. Careful manipulation disguised as concern, doubt planted through half-truths, and convenient timing. Allies gathered slowly, until the moment arrives to strike decisively. I watched your father attempt precisely this strategy 18 years ago, and I paid the price for his ambition, with 18 years of my life stolen from me. I will not stand by and allow his son to finish what he started." The hall fell into tense, charged silence, every eye fixed on Doran as he stood exposed before the very council he had worked so carefully to manipulate. Several of his previously allied pack leaders began shifting away from him, their expressions carrying open suspicion now that the truth of his family's history had been laid bare before them. "This changes nothing," Doran said, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. "Even if my father's actions are true, they do not diminish the legitimate concerns raised about this crown's stability. The bond confusion, the secretive reversal ritual, these remain valid points regardless of my family's history. They remain valid points that any honest crown would address transparently," Cale said, "which is precisely what we have done, before this very council, the moment we understood their significance. You, on the other hand, have used carefully timed rumor and manufactured crisis to further an agenda you now stand exposed as having inherited directly from the very traitors who once tried to destroy this kingdom." Doran's eyes darted around the hall, taking in the shifting allegiances among his once loyal allies, and something desperate flickered behind his gaze as he recognized the crumbling foundation of his carefully constructed challenge. In a sudden, reckless move, he reached for the blade at his side, his expression twisting into something far more dangerous than mere political ambition. "If words will not secure what is rightfully owed to my family," he snarled, "then perhaps other means will suffice." Guards moved instantly, and Finn positioned himself protectively before Cale and Isolde, his own blade drawn in a fluid, practiced motion. But before Doran could act on his desperate threat, several of his own allied guards, recognizing the reckless folly of open confrontation before an entire assembled council, stepped back rather than moving to support him, leaving him dangerously exposed and alone in his sudden aggression. "Stand down, Doran," Cale commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority despite the tension of the moment. "This ends now, one way or another." For a long, tense breath, Doran remained frozen, blade still drawn, clearly calculating whether any path remained that might still salvage his failing ambition. Then, slowly, recognizing the impossibility of his position, surrounded by guards and abandoned by allies who wanted no part of open treachery against a clearly legitimate crown, he lowered his weapon, his shoulders sagging with the weight of defeat. "Take him into custody," Cale ordered, and guards moved swiftly to restrain Doran, disarming him carefully while the hall watched in stunned, heavy silence. As Doran was led away, his expression twisted with bitter resentment rather than remorse. Isolde felt the tension finally begin to ease from her shoulders. 18 years of buried grief and unfinished business, finally settling into something resembling closure. She turned to look at Cale, pride and exhaustion mingling in her gaze. "It is finished," she said softly. "The threat your father and I once faced 18 years ago, finally, truly resolved. Thanks to you," Cale said, taking her hand gently. "Your courage, your strength, even after everything the spell stole from you these past 18 years. This kingdom owes you a debt it can never fully repay." The remaining council members, many of them visibly shaken by the sudden violence of Doran's final desperate act, quickly moved to reaffirm their loyalty to Cale's rule, the earlier doubts and hesitations dissolving entirely in the face of Doran's exposed treachery. What had begun as a carefully orchestrated challenge to the crown's legitimacy ended instead in the complete unraveling of the very ambition that had driven it, leaving Blackthorn Ridge more united and stable than it had been in years. As the hall slowly began to empty, guards escorting Doran toward the palace's secure holding chambers to await formal judgment, Isolde allowed herself a rare, quiet smile, the first true moment of peace she had felt since the reversal ritual had restored her true self only days before. "What happens to him now?" she asked Cale quietly, watching Doran's retreating figure disappear through the hall's far doors. "He will face formal judgment before the full council," Cale said. "Given the severity of his actions and the evidence of his family's history, I do not expect leniency to be extended easily. But that is a matter for tomorrow. Tonight, I simply want to sit with my mother and finally breathe easily after everything these past days have demanded of us both." Isolde squeezed his hand gently, warmth and gratitude filling her chest as she looked at the strong, capable king her son had become during the long years of her forgotten absence. "That sounds like exactly what we both need," she said softly, and together, they made their way from the hall, leaving behind the tension and danger of the past days, ready finally to embrace whatever quieter future now lay ahead of them. In the days that followed Doran's arrest, the palace slowly began settling back into a steadier rhythm, though the shock of everything that had transpired continued rippling through the kingdom as word spread from village to village. The miraculous return of Queen Isolde, the exposure of a hidden conspiracy nearly 2 decades in the making, the dramatic unraveling of a challenge to the crown that had seemed, only days before, dangerously close to succeeding. Isolde spent much of that time reconnecting with a kingdom she had once ruled and long believed lost to her forever, walking through familiar halls that stirred fresh memories with every step, meeting with council members eager to formally welcome her back into a role of respected counsel and guidance. She found the work exhausting but deeply meaningful, each conversation, each rediscovered corner of the palace, helping to knit together the two halves of her fractured identity into something whole and steady. Edric visited often during those days, the two of them slowly rebuilding a connection, strained by 18 years of separated grief, finding comfort in shared memories, and the quiet, patient work of learning each other again after so much lost time. Their relationship carried a gentleness born of hard-won wisdom, neither of them rushing toward expectations the intervening years had naturally reshaped, content instead to simply enjoy each other's renewed presence, without pressure or demand. Cale, meanwhile, found himself navigating the complicated task of formally addressing the fallout from Doran's arrest, working closely with Garrick and Finn to ensure the affected pack alliances remained stable during the transition, while also managing the delicate diplomatic work of reassuring neighboring territories that Blackthorn Ridge remained strong and secure, despite the recent upheaval. It was during one such diplomatic meeting, held to formally address concerns among the pack leaders who had briefly aligned with Doran before recognizing his treachery, that Cale found himself seated across from a warrior named Sarah, sent as a representative from a smaller allied pack along the kingdom's eastern border. She spoke with quiet confidence and sharp, practical insight, offering perspectives on the situation that Cale found himself genuinely appreciating throughout their lengthy discussion. "You handled Doran's exposure with impressive restraint," Sarah observed as their meeting drew toward its conclusion. "Many rulers, faced with such direct treachery, would have moved toward far harsher immediate punishment, rather than allowing proper council process to run its course." "Restraint felt important," Cale said. "This kingdom has seen enough division these past days. I did not want to add further instability through hasty action, however justified anger might have made such action feel in the moment." Sarah studied him thoughtfully, something like quiet respect visible in her expression. "A wise approach, Your Majesty. Though I imagine it required considerable discipline, given everything your family has endured." Cale found himself surprised by how easily their conversation flowed, how comfortable he felt discussing not just diplomatic matters, but the personal weight of recent events, with someone he had only just met that day. There was no strange pull of bonded magic between them, nothing like the confusing warmth he had once mistaken for a mate bond with his own mother, only a simple, genuine ease of connection that felt refreshingly uncomplicated after everything the past weeks had demanded of him. Isolde, observing the interaction from across the room, where she had been quietly consulting with Garrick on unrelated matters, noticed the easy warmth developing between her son and the visiting warrior, with a small, knowing smile touching her lips. She said nothing at the time, content simply to watch the moment unfold naturally, though she filed the observation away with quiet, hopeful interest. That evening, as the palace settled into another peaceful night, free at last from the looming threat that had shadowed recent weeks, Isolde found Kale standing alone in the western gardens, the same clearing where the reversal ritual had taken place, now bathed in ordinary, gentle moonlight, rather than the intense silver brilliance of that transformative night. "You seem thoughtful," she observed, joining him quietly among the flowering hedges. "I find myself reflecting on everything these past weeks have taught me," Kale admitted. "About family, about the false comfort of assumptions we build without proper questioning, about the difference between a bond forced by circumstance and a connection built through genuine understanding and choice." Isolde nodded slowly, understanding the deeper meaning behind his words. "The warrior from this afternoon's meeting, Sarah, I believe her name was." Kale offered a small, slightly embarrassed smile. "Word travels quickly through this palace, it seems." "A mother notices such things," Isolde said warmly. "There is nothing embarrassing about finding genuine connection, Kale, especially after everything you have endured these past weeks, discovering the true nature of a bond that once seemed so certain, only to learn it meant something else entirely." "I do not wish to rush into anything," Kale said carefully. "But I confess, our conversation today left me curious to know her better, without the pressure or confusion of ancient magic dictating the terms of that curiosity." "Then allow yourself that curiosity," Isolde said gently. "Whatever grows from it, grow it slowly, honestly, built on genuine choice rather than forced obligation. That is a lesson this entire kingdom has learned rather thoroughly these past weeks, I think." Kale laughed softly at that, some of the heaviness of recent events finally beginning to lift from his shoulders. "A fair point, Mother. Perhaps the wisest lesson of everything we have endured together." They stood together in comfortable silence for a while longer, beneath the same moon that had once transformed a confused servant girl into a restored queen, watching over a kingdom finally settling into steadier, more honest ground after weeks of upheaval and revelation. Whatever challenges still remained ahead, both of them felt, for the first time in a very long while, genuinely hopeful about the future finally opening before them. Trumpets sounded across Blackthorn Ridge as the entire kingdom gathered for the formal celebration, marking Queen Isolde's official return to the throne, a ceremony far grander and more joyful than the tense, carefully staged distraction that had once served as cover for the true reversal ritual weeks before. Banners lined every street leading toward the palace, and villagers from every corner of the kingdom traveled for days to witness the historic occasion, eager to see with their own eyes the beloved queen so many had long believed lost forever. Isolde stood at the palace balcony overlooking the massive crowd gathered below, dressed in fine royal attire that felt, after so many weeks of readjustment, finally comfortable against her skin, a physical reflection of how fully she had reclaimed her true identity. Beside her stood Kale, resplendent in his own formal attire, and Edric, who had chosen to stand quietly at his former wife's side for this momentous occasion, their renewed bond, though changed by time and circumstance, clearly evident in the warmth passing between them. "The kingdom has waited a long time for this day," Garrick said, joining them on the balcony with evident satisfaction, having worked tirelessly these past weeks to help coordinate the celebration alongside his usual advisory duties. "As have I," Isolde said softly, looking out over the joyful crowd with quiet wonder, "though I confess, I never truly understood how deeply I had been missed until I stood here, seeing it reflected in every face below." The formal ceremony began shortly after, marked by traditional blessings and speeches, celebrating both Isolde's miraculous return and the kingdom's successful navigation of the crisis Doran's exposed treachery had nearly caused. Doran himself had been formally judged in the weeks since his arrest, stripped of his title and lands, sentenced to permanent exile from Blackthorn Ridge and all allied territories, a fate that satisfied justice without requiring the harsher measures some council members had initially demanded. Petra stood among the honored guests during the ceremony, finally receiving public recognition for the sacrifice, and quiet devotion that had protected Isolde's life for 18 difficult years. Isolde made a point of personally acknowledging her old friend before the assembled crowd, her voice thick with genuine emotion as she spoke of the debt she could never fully repay. "This woman gave up everything to protect me," Isolde said, her hand resting warmly on Petra's shoulder as the crowd listened in respectful silence. "She sacrificed years of her own life, living in quiet isolation, carrying a secret whose weight would have crushed lesser souls, all so that I might one day find my way home. I owe her more gratitude than words can properly express, and I intend to spend whatever years remain to me, finding ways to honor that debt." Petra, visibly moved by the public recognition, simply bowed her head with quiet humility, though the warmth in her eyes spoke volumes about how deeply the acknowledgement touched her after so many years of silent, unrewarded sacrifice. Nessa and Brona, Illyra's old friends from the kitchen staff, watched the ceremony from among the palace servants gathered near the edges of the celebration, both of them still adjusting to the strange, wonderful reality that the friend they had known simply as a fellow servant girl had turned out to be the kingdom's long-lost queen all along. "I still cannot quite believe it," Brona whispered to Nessa, as they watched Isolde address the crowd with regal confidence. "She always seemed too kind to be ordinary, somehow. Perhaps some part of us always sensed there was something remarkable about her." "She has not forgotten us, at least," Nessa said, nodding toward where Isolde had specifically requested their presence among the honored guests, a small but meaningful gesture that spoke to the queen's continued warmth, despite her restored royal status. "Whatever crown she wears now, I do not think she will ever lose the kindness that first led her to help an old woman in the forest, instead of chasing her own uncertain future at that fateful ceremony." As the formal proceedings drew toward their conclusion, Cale stepped forward to address the crowd himself, his voice carrying clearly across the joyful assembly. "This kingdom has endured much these past weeks," he said, "confusion, danger, and the exposure of treachery that nearly succeeded in tearing apart everything my family and this crown have worked to protect. But we have emerged stronger, united not through forced magic or ancient bonds, but through honest truth, difficult courage, and the genuine bonds of family and loyalty that no spell could ever fully replicate." He paused, his gaze finding Sarah among the gathered pack representatives, a warm, private smile passing briefly between them, before he continued addressing the wider crowd. "I have learned much these past weeks about the true nature of connection, about the difference between bonds forced by circumstance and those built through genuine choice and understanding. I look forward, in time, to sharing more of that journey with this kingdom, though today belongs rightfully to my mother, and to her long-awaited, well-deserved return." The crowd erupted into joyful cheers, celebrating long into the evening with feasting and music that echoed throughout the palace grounds and the surrounding villages alike. Isolde spent much of the celebration moving among her people, listening to their stories, sharing quiet moments of genuine connection with wolves who had mourned her loss for 18 long years, and now celebrated her return with unrestrained joy. Late that evening, as the celebration finally began winding down, Isolde found herself once more in the quiet western gardens, standing beneath the same stars that had witnessed her transformation weeks before. Cale joined her there, along with Edric, the three of them standing together in comfortable, peaceful silence, finally free from the shadow of danger and uncertainty that had defined so much of their recent journey together. "What will you do now?" Cale asked his mother gently. "Now that the kingdom is settled and the danger has passed?" Isolde considered the question thoughtfully, looking out over the moonlit gardens with quiet contentment. "I think," she said slowly, "I would like to simply live, for a while. To rediscover this kingdom, and myself, without the urgency of crisis pressing against every moment. To watch you continue growing into the wise king you have already become. Perhaps even to see you find happiness with someone whose connection to you is built on nothing more complicated than genuine choice and mutual respect." Cale smiled softly at the gentle reference to Sarah, warmth filling his chest at the thought of a future finally free from the confusion and danger of recent weeks. "That sounds like a wonderful way to begin," he said. "Together, as a family, exactly as we always should have been." Edric reached out and took Isolde's hand gently, and she allowed the gesture, a small, hopeful step toward whatever renewed connection time and patience might eventually rebuild between them. Above them, the stars shone bright and steady over Blackthorn Ridge, watching over a kingdom finally at peace, a family finally whole, and a queen who had traveled an impossible, extraordinary journey, from a nameless servant girl helping a stranger in the forest, to the rightful ruler, standing proudly beside her son, ready at last to embrace the future she had once believed, lost to her forever. The old woman Alira had once knelt beside in the mud, offering simple kindness without any thought of reward, had turned out to be far more than a stranger in need. She had been the key to a truth, 18 years buried, a mother's love strong enough to survive even the cruelest magic, and a queen whose kindness, whether as a servant girl or a ruler, had never once wavered throughout the entire remarkable journey. And as Blackthorn Ridge settled into a new era of peace and honest connection, that kindness continued rippling outward, touching every life it encountered, exactly as it always had, long before anyone knew the true, extraordinary story it carried within it. Months passed, and Blackthorn Ridge settled comfortably into the peaceful rhythm Isolde had once hoped for beneath the stars that celebratory night. The kingdom, having weathered the storm of Doran's exposed treachery and emerged stronger for it, turned its attention toward the ordinary business of prosperity and growth, the memory of recent crisis slowly fading into the kind of story told with wonder rather than fear. Isolde took to her renewed role as Queen Mother with quiet grace, dividing her time between offering wise counsel to Chaol on matters of governance and simply enjoying the small pleasures of a life she had once believed stolen from her forever. She spent many mornings walking through the palace gardens, sometimes alone, sometimes with Petra, who had finally accepted an invitation to remain permanently within the palace grounds, rather than returning to her isolated cottage in the forest. "You do not have to keep hiding away from the world," Isolde told her old friend one such morning, the two of them sharing tea beneath the same oak trees where the reversal ritual had once taken place. "You have earned rest and recognition after everything you sacrificed." "Old habits prove difficult to break," Petra admitted, though a genuine smile touched her weathered face. "But I confess, I have grown fond of these gardens, and of the company I find within these walls. Perhaps I am finally learning to accept the kindness I spent so many years extending toward others." Edric visited frequently as well, his relationship with Isolde deepening slowly and naturally, built now on the patient, hard-won understanding of two people who had lost each other once and refused to take a second chance for granted. They did not rush toward any grand reconciliation, content instead to rediscover each other gradually, finding comfort in shared memories alongside newly created ones, a quiet, steady love, rebuilding itself one honest conversation at a time. Chaol, meanwhile, found his own connection with Sarah, growing steadily through the months that followed, built entirely on the foundation of genuine choice and mutual respect he had spoken of during the celebration. She visited the palace often, on legitimate diplomatic business at first, though both of them soon stopped pretending the visits required official justification, choosing instead to simply enjoy each other's company openly, without the pressure of ancient magic dictating the terms of their growing affection. "I confess, I once feared I would never understand what a true, chosen connection felt like," Chaol admitted to Sarah one evening, the two of them walking together through the same gardens that had witnessed so much of his family's recent history. "For 3 years, I believed the absence of a bond meant something was fundamentally lacking in me. Then I discovered the bond I finally received meant something else entirely, something far more complicated than I ever expected. Now, with you, I find myself grateful for the confusion, strange as that may sound, because it led me toward learning what genuine choice actually feels like." "I am glad it did," Sarah said warmly, though I imagine the journey to that understanding was not an easy one to walk. "No," Chaol agreed, "though I do not think I would trade the lessons it taught me, difficult as they were. My mother once told me that some things run deeper than memory alone, that kindness and courage remain constant even when everything else about a person's identity shifts and changes. I believe the same is true of genuine connection. It does not require ancient magic to make it real. It simply requires two people choosing each other, again and again, with open eyes and honest hearts." As autumn gave way to winter, and the kingdom settled into the quiet rhythms of the changing season, Isolde found herself once more standing at the palace balcony, where she had first addressed her people as their restored queen, watching snow begin to fall gently over Blackthorn Ridge. Chaol joined her there, as he often did during these quiet evening moments, and together they watched the peaceful scene unfold below. "Do you ever think of her?" Cale asked softly. "Elira, I mean. The identity you carried for those 18 years." Isolde considered the question thoughtfully before answering. "Every day," she admitted. "Not with sadness, but with gratitude. Elira taught me things I might never have learned as queen alone, wrapped in the protections and expectations of royal life. She taught me the value of small kindnesses, the quiet dignity found in simple work, the deep friendships built without regard for title or status. I do not think of her as someone I lost, Cale. I think of her as part of who I have always been, simply given the chance to exist without the weight of a crown, for a little while." Cale smiled softly at his mother's words, understanding at last the full, remarkable shape of the journey that had brought them to this peaceful moment. "Then perhaps," he said, "the kindness that led a servant girl to help a stranger in the forest, instead of attending her own uncertain ceremony, was never truly separate from the strength that once ruled this kingdom wisely and well. Perhaps they were always the very same heart, simply waiting for the right moment to be fully seen." "Perhaps," Isolde agreed, warmth filling her chest, as she watched the snow continue falling gently over the kingdom she had fought so hard, in so many different ways, to protect. "Whatever the truth of it, I am simply grateful, every single day, for the chance to finally live it fully, exactly as myself, at long last." Together, mother and son stood watching the peaceful winter evening settle over Blackthorn Ridge, a kingdom finally whole, a family finally reunited, and a story that had begun with one small, simple act of kindness in a quiet forest, now closing gently into the peaceful, well-earned ending it had always deserved.